Jon Snow gazed over the ramparts of Winterfell, the cold wind rustling through his dark curls. The courtyard below felt both familiar and foreign, for so much had changed since he was last truly home. War and loss had seeped into every stone, every grain of frost caked on the rampart's edge. He could still sense the ghosts of all who had fought here, bled here, or died here, both living and dead in that final struggle against the White Walkers. But those darker days were behind them now, or so he prayed. The winter's chill still clung to the north, though it waned beneath a new sun. And in that thinning frost, he saw a future that might yet blossom. He drew in a long breath, biting back the memory of Daenerys Targaryen and the ashes she left behind. She had been his queen, and in some ways his love, but the burden of her final descent into madness still weighed heavily on him. The realm was broken, half-scorched, and wholly traumatized by years of civil war and near-apocalyptic threat from beyond the wall. Yet Jon was not one to wallow in regrets. He had left King's Landing, abandoned the Iron Throne and any right he might have had to claim it, choosing instead to return to the north he had always loved. That choice felt right, even if it wasn't simple. He rubbed a gloved hand over the coarse stone. Down below, men-at-arms bustled through the yard, carrying timbers for repairs, forging new links of chain, and restitching the banners that had once flown proudly, the direwolf of Stark on a field of grey, and unexpectedly, the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Those creatures had once soared over Westeros in conquest, and now one of them, at least, was perched beyond the gates like some living legend. Rhaegal had followed Jon here. The dragon had lost siblings and riders, but found strange kinship in Jon's own half-Targaryen blood. What Daenerys had begun through dragons, Jon had inherited. This was the last living scion of that ancient line of fire, older even than the walls of Winterfell. He turned to descend the steps, and as his boots crunched on the stone, his mind wandered to the one man he still counted as brother, Robb Stark. Somehow, through no small miracle, Robb had survived the betrayal at the twins. Much had changed in that tragic moment at the Red Wedding, but in this alternate turn of events, loyal northern houses had rallied. Some had died at the Frey's hands, yes, but the great Jon Umber had gotten wind of the treachery, and with a handful of stalwart men he had rushed Robb to safety. What followed was a fierce guerrilla war in the Riverlands until the Lion's jaws were forced open elsewhere and the Northmen took advantage of every crack in the Lannisters' lines. Robb's armies persevered, battered but unbroken. When the call to unite against the others rang out, a call championed by Jon, who had returned from the Wall with dire warnings. Robb Stark set aside his vendetta for the Iron Throne to join with the rest of Westeros in the war for the Dawn. During that terrible winter, they had staved off the end of the world, forging alliances that seemed impossible before. The North was battered, scarred. The Riverlands lay half-flooded in blood. King's Landing smoldered in the aftermath of the dragon's wrath. And yet Robb Stark and Jon Snow had emerged, battered but alive, leading a realm that needed rebuilding more than it needed vengeance. Jon believed in building anew. He believed the realm had to heal from the ground up, forging a unity that the Targaryens of old had once enforced through fear. A new unity needed trust. It needed an act that would bind the greatest powers of Westeros in a way that was both symbolic and practical. He had thought long on it through many sleepless nights. The North needed the South, and the South needed the North. There had to be some greater sign of harmony than mere words on a parchment or a wedding alliance. That was when the idea came to him. Rhaegal. The dragon was more than a beast of war. He was a living symbol of the old Targaryen conquest, but also, if used properly, of a new era. Rhaegal had always been Daenerys' gentlest dragon, the one named for Rhaegar Targaryen, the father Jon never knew. Of the three, Rhaegal had come to bond with Jon in a tentative way, as if recognizing the Targaryen blood in him. If there was one creature that could embody the unity between Stark and Targaryen, it was Rhaegal. And if Jon could present that dragon, willingly, to Robb Stark, his once older brother in name and now recognized cousin in truth, then it might lay the foundation for the North and the Targaryen line to stand united. Two ancient houses joined by something more powerful than crowns or seats of power. He knew it would not be an easy gift to accept. Robb was a Stark through and through, the king in the North once crowned by his bannermen. He was proud and honorable, but not without caution. Dragons had burned the Tully lands. Dragons had burned King's Landing. Could the North truly place any faith in such a beast? Jon was determined to show them that Rhaegal was different. He had seen the creature up close. He had cared for him, riding him into battle against the undead. He knew the loyalty and gentleness Rhaegal could show, provided the bond was nurtured. As Jon reached the courtyard, men halted to bow or nod in his direction. Servants, soldiers, ex-wildlings who had come south with him, loyal Northmen with furred collars. Jon's position was tenuous at best, a hero of the realm yet also the man who bent the knee to Daenerys Targaryen. Some in the north had not forgiven that, but for all their skepticism he felt a certain acceptance among them. They recognized in Jon something of Eddard Stark, that quiet sense of decency. And if Robb trusted him, so would they. In the courtyard's center, Robb Stark was overseeing the final touches of repairs to the old stables. His hair was longer than Jon remembered, the auburn hue gone a shade darker from the harsh winters and unrelenting stress of warfare. A thick scar ran across his cheek from the Battle of the Whispering Wood. Another smaller scar punctuated the back of his right hand, rumored to have come from a desperate fight by the Red Fork. He looked every bit the hardened commander, and yet there was in his eyes a softness that hadn't dulled, an echo of the boy who would laugh with Jon in Winterfell's halls. Despite it all, he was still Robb, still the brother who taught Jon how to wrestle properly, who teased him about being too stiff, too serious. Robb was speaking with a gray-bearded master builder when he caught sight of Jon. He excused himself with a polite word and strode toward his brother-cousin. They clasped forearms in greeting, letting the moment linger. Two men who had seen the end of the world and lived to tell the tale. "How fares our old home?" Jon asked, nodding to the stables. Robb sighed. "Better than I expected. We lost more men to the cold than we did to swords this last winter. Some nights I thought the wind would bury us whole, walls and all. But we endured." "That's what the North does," Jon replied softly, glancing toward the sky. White clouds drifted overhead, tinted with gold from the late afternoon sun. "We endure, and now we must rebuild." Robb's eyes flicked to the great yard's gates, beyond which Rhaegal was half visible, his silhouette looming. "And you've brought a dragon to aid in that cause?" Jon took a steadying breath. "I did, and I'd have words with you about him." "I'm listening," Robb said. His tone was neither unfriendly nor unwelcoming. It was the tone of a man who had learned caution the hard way, but who still trusted Jon enough to listen. They walked to the perimeter of the yard, away from prying ears. Jon's gaze lingered on a few sparring men, Winterfell's new recruits practicing with blunted spears. He remembered the practice yard from his youth, how Theon would stand behind Robb, cheering him on against Jon, how they had all been so young and proud. Now Theon was long gone, having paid dearly for his transgressions and his attempts at redemption. Arya, Bran, Sansa, where were they now? Each scattered in their own direction. Sansa in the Eyrie with a new alliance, Arya traveling the wide world, Bran rumored to be forging a new order of Greenseers far beyond. Yet he and Robb, the two who had once been so close, were here again. Winterfell endured. He spoke slowly. "A dragon can be many things, a weapon of devastation or a banner of unity. Rhaegal is the last of Daenerys' children. He's mine to command, but I have no wish to command armies or kingdoms. I left King's Landing for good reason. I know you still bear the title king in the north. But with the others defeated, we no longer have a single enemy to unite us. We need something else." Robb's expression hardened as he realized what Jon was hinting at. "I've seen what dragons can do, Jon, and I've seen what they did to the Riverlands, to the Lannister hosts." His voice grew quiet, remembering the wretched realities of war. "What you're proposing? I'm not entirely certain I want it." Jon nodded. "But you should. Because if the houses of Westeros are to stand together, we need more than men and steel. We need hope. Something that binds us. The Targaryen name carries history, as does the Stark name. The realm knows me as half Targaryen. They know you as a Stark. If we stand together, if I offer you this symbol of unity, this dragon, then the entire realm will see that House Stark and House Targaryen are no longer at odds or bound by oaths made under threat. They'll see we share purpose." Robb's gaze followed a swirl of wind-blown leaves crossing the yard, then his eyes returned to Jon's. "You're giving me Rhaegal?" "Yes. The realm believes the Targaryens are finished or scattered. But I'm still here. The dragon is still here. Let this be a new age of cooperation, not conquest. I want nothing from you in return, only your promise that you'll uphold justice and strive for peace as we rebuild." "It's a hefty gift," Robb murmured, looking uneasy. "I'm not sure I'm deserving or even capable of harnessing a dragon. Who am I to claim such a creature?" "You're Robb Stark," Jon said, a faint smile touching his lips. "You're the man who was willing to fight for the North's freedom. You stood against tyranny, but you've also learned you can't stand alone. You're a man who parted ways with vengeance when the realm needed you. That's exactly the kind of man who should have a dragon, not one who hungers for power, but one who wields it reluctantly. Robb was silent a moment, the wind stirring the wolf fur collar around his shoulders. At last, he nodded, though the doubt remained in the set of his jaw. I'll think on it. I won't say no, not outright. But let me see this creature up close. Let me look him in the eye, gauge him as I would a horse or hound. If he'll have me, if he'll let me near him, then perhaps we can find a way forward. Jon exhaled the tension that had been knotting in his chest. Come on then. I'll show you to him. They exited Winterfell's main gate and followed a short path beyond the outer walls. A wide clearing had been fashioned into a makeshift paddock. Heavy timbers reinforced the sides in case Rhaegal grew agitated. Yet the dragon lay there calmly, tail curled around his flank, golden-green eyes half-lidded. He still bore scars from the Battle of Winterfell, from the final stand in King's Landing. The largest scar traced across his neck, remnants from a ballista bolt. His wings, folded tight, looked like dark emerald sails. Though fearsome, the creature radiated a certain regality and poise that seemed at odds with the typical perception of dragons as wild beasts. As they drew near, Rhaegal opened his eyes fully and lifted his head. A low rumble emanated from deep in his throat. Not quite a growl, more like a cautious acknowledgement. Jon stepped forward with slow, unhurried movements, letting the dragon sniff him. Rhaegal's eyes flicked from Jon to Robb and back, uncertain. Jon spoke softly, though he knew the beast might not understand words so much as intent. Easy, boy. This is Robb. My brother. We trust him. Robb took a measured step forward. Jon saw the flicker of awe cross his brother's face as he looked upon the dragon's scales. Standing this close, he realized anew the vastness of Rhaegal's form. How a single tooth was longer than a grown man's hand. How each scale caught the faint northern sunlight in layered fractals of green and bronze. Robb extended one gloved hand, as if reaching to calm a shy mare. Rhaegal considered him for a tense second, then snorted a plume of hot breath that sent frost melting on the grass. Steady, Jon whispered, though whether to Rhaegal or Robb he wasn't sure. Inch by inch, Robb moved closer until his hand brushed the dragon's scale. It was warm to the touch, alive with heat that radiated from within. The dragon did not recoil. Instead, Rhaegal let out another rumble, a sound that held less tension and more curiosity. Robb's voice was quiet, tinged with awe. Gods. It's like touching living fire. Jon nodded. That's exactly what he is. A living flame of House Targaryen. Robb was silent for a moment longer, letting his hand trace along the dragon's neck where the scales were thick but still bore the faint remnants of old wounds. Finally, he turned to Jon. Let's say I accept. What happens then? Jon carefully met Robb's gaze. Then you will be the first Stark in history to ride a dragon. You'll become a banner of unity for the North and beyond. Imagine the great houses. They'll pause before crossing you, or the alliance we forge. But more than that, you'll be a sign of peace, that dragons are not simply the old Targaryen whip. I'll stand by you, of course. You'd be the rider, but my bond with Rhaegal remains. I can help you learn. Robb dropped his hand and let out a breath that condensed in the brisk air. If this is what it takes to heal the realm, I'm in no position to refuse. The North needs peace, not more war. If the rest of Westeros sees that a Stark and a Targaryen stand as one, maybe that helps unify us in rebuilding. And if we ever face another threat, well, better we have the means to face it. Jon's relief was profound. He had worried Robb would flatly reject the notion. But the acceptance in his eyes was real. Jon clapped a hand on Robb's shoulder. We'll go slowly. We'll build trust between you and Rhaegal. Robb's gaze flicked to the dragon, who watched them with a deep intelligence in his reptilian eyes. I've broken wolves before. Horses too. But this is new. Jon's mouth curved in a small grin. There's a first time for everything. They returned to Winterfell in silence, the gravity of their conversation echoing between them. That night, they held a small feast in the Great Hall. It wasn't a lavish affair, for the North was still short on supplies, but it was enough to fill bellies and raise spirits. Bowls of hot stew, roasted turnips, salted beef, and some mead. The high table was occupied by Robb, Jon, a few lords who remained loyal to House Stark, and a handful of key advisors who had traveled north with Jon. Though conversation flowed easily enough, reports of farmland needing reseeding, villages to be rebuilt, everyone sensed a tension in the air. They suspected something momentous was afoot, but no one quite knew what, beyond the presence of the dragon outside. Jon knew that he and Robb would soon have to address the realm openly. They had to proclaim their new alliance or risk rumors and misunderstandings. He could only hope that the rest of the North, so fiercely proud of its independence, would accept this union. The night wore on with hushed talk. Eventually, the hall emptied and Jon found himself alone near the hearth. Embers glowed red in the darkness, dancing shadows across his face. He thought of Daenerys again, how she had once stood so proudly beneath the Targaryen banners, championing the liberation of slaves and the forging of a new world. How close they had come to forging something noble before everything fell to madness and flame. He wondered what she would think now, knowing her last living dragon was about to be gifted to a Stark. Yet he felt certain she would understand at least the best version of herself would have. There had been a time when Daenerys believed her dragons were not just weapons but the hope of freeing the oppressed. Now, in a way, Rhaegal was a chance to unify a shattered world. Jon took solace in that. Perhaps it was the only way to atone for her downfall. He retired to his old chambers. The room was small, cold, and unadorned, yet it was more comforting than all the lavish spaces he had inhabited in King's Landing. He shed his layers of fur and leather, then sat on the edge of the straw-stuffed mattress, listening to the soft hush of wind outside. His mind churned with possibilities, anxieties, hopes. Sleep took him slowly, but when it did, he sank into a deep slumber free of nightmares for the first time in many moons. When dawn broke, Jon rose to find Robb already awake. The king in the north stood in the courtyard again, greeting some of the lords who had arrived from neighboring holds to discuss the ongoing reconstruction efforts. Lord Glover, Lord Serwyn, Lady Mormont's cousin, for young Lyanna Mormont had perished in the war against the dead. And even a delegate from the Vale were present. They all bowed or nodded respectfully at the sight of Jon, though some wore uncertain expressions, memories of how he had bent the knee to a Targaryen queen. Jon caught Lady Mormont's cousin sizing him up as if searching for any sign of betrayal. Robb beckoned Jon over. "We were just discussing the distribution of grain from the Vale to the most devastated regions. With winter having only just ended, our reserves are low. The Vale can spare some, but not enough to feed half the north." The Vale delegate, a tall man with a hawkish nose, nodded gravely. "Our own fields suffered from the prolonged cold. We can offer a portion of last harvest stores, but we must consider our own people. Unless, there's reason to believe we'll receive further support from the southern lords." Jon heard the unspoken question, would the Targaryen side supply them? He knew that King's Landing was in disarray with no clear occupant on the Iron Throne. Cersei Lannister was long dead, but the city had been largely ruined. The lords who had survived that devastation, House Tyrell was gone, House Martell battered, were in no shape to provide immediate relief. A portion of House Baratheon's old strength remained in Storm's End, tenuously led by Gendry, who had been acknowledged as Robert Baratheon's bastard turned legitimate by Queen Daenerys before her end. But even Gendry's lands had been ravaged by war. A sense of despair weighed on Jon's heart. They needed a symbol to rally behind. And that, Jon thought, was precisely what Rhaegal and this new alliance were meant to be. He cleared his throat. "I've been in contact with Lord Davos, who remains near King's Landing, overseeing the combined efforts of men loyal to Stannis' memory and some who had come around to Daenerys in her final days. They're clearing rubble, restoring farmland around the Crownlands. It's slow, but they'll have a modest surplus by the end of summer. Enough to spare a portion to the north." Robb nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Send ravens. Let's keep that line of supply open. In the meantime, we'll rely on the Vale's contribution, meager though it may be. The mountain passes won't be open for too long before snows threaten them again. Time is short." The talk continued, focusing on logistics and the looming question of who will truly rule once the dust settled. After a few hours, the lords dispersed. Robb drew Jon aside. "Let's not delay. We should address them soon. Call them to the Great Hall. It's time we make our intentions clear." Jon agreed. "Then we'll do it before midday meal." So it was that a few hours later, lords and ladies, knights and common folk alike, gathered in the Great Hall of Winterfell. Though battered, the hall retained its grandeur, high ceilings of ancient timbers, banners hanging from the walls, a long table at the dais where the head of House Stark would preside. At the moment, that was Robb. Jon stood at his side. A hush fell over the hall. The lords from across the north and representatives from the Vale, the Riverlands, and even a handful from the Westerlands were present, curious and tense. Robb rose from his seat, stepping forward so all could see him clearly. The light of torches played across his face, revealing the faint lines that years of war had etched there. His voice was measured but carried the confidence of one who had led armies. My friends and loyal bannermen, for years we've endured heartbreak and devastation. We've fought wars against men, against the dead, against dragons. The North has stood resolute but not without cost. Now, as we set about rebuilding, we face a choice. Do we remain locked in old grudges, old conflicts? Or do we seize a new path toward unity and stability? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Robb raised a hand, quieting them. I've discussed this matter with my brother, Jon Snow, though he bears a Targaryen name as well. We believe the time has come for a gesture that transcends old boundaries. And so, I speak plainly, Jon Snow has offered me the dragon Rhaegal as a symbol of Stark, Targaryen unity. This is not a threat. It is not an act of conquest. It is a gesture of alliance, one that I will accept, for the good of the North and for all of Westeros. The murmur rose into an uproar of astonishment. Some voices cried, a dragon in the North? Others whispered in alarm. The Vale delegates' eyes went wide, but Robb continued with a calm unwavering in his tone. I know your fears. Dragons once torched these lands, but I ask you to consider what it means if a Stark can ride one. If we men and women of the North can harness that flame, not to burn our foes but to protect our people. To show the rest of Westeros we will stand for peace. Let them see the wolf and the dragon as one, not as enemies. Jon stepped forward then. He could feel every eye on him, some curious, some frightened, some wary. He cleared his throat, speaking in that quiet but earnest manner that had once rallied the Night's Watch. I stand before you as a man of both houses, Stark and Targaryen. I've seen the good dragons can do as well as the destruction. It lies in the hands of those who command them. I offer Rhaegal freely to Robb Stark, king in the North, because I trust him. I trust his heart, his honor, and his love for his people. I ask you all to share in that trust. Lord Glover raised his voice, looking uncertain. We remember how the Mad King burned Rhaegal Stark in King's Landing with wildfire. We remember how Daenerys Targaryen burned the Lannister army and sacked King's Landing. Why should we see your gift as anything but more dragon fire? Jon looked him in the eye. Because Rhaegal is not the Mad King, nor is he Daenerys. He's a living creature bound to whomever he accepts as righter. Robb is no tyrant. We've bled beside him. We know his heart. The older lord pursed his lips but said nothing more. Others in the crowd exchanged glances. Finally, Lady Mormont's cousin, a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 30s, spoke up. If the dragon is truly loyal to the Starks, then it changes the balance of power in the North. Would you expect the rest of us to kneel as we did before Aegon's dragons centuries ago? Robb shook his head. I want no forced fealty. I want cooperation as lords under the king in the North, yes, but not out of fear. We've stood side by side in war. Let us stand side by side in peace with the dragon as a guardian, not a whip. Gradually, the hall fell quiet again. Heads nodded here and there. Some remained tense, but none voiced outright refusal. It seemed they would follow Robb's lead. He was their king, after all, chosen by their own banners. They had nowhere else to turn if they wanted to rebuild the North into something prosperous again. The assembled lords broke into smaller knots of conversation. Jon sensed the undercurrent. This was a radical shift. Dragons had never been an ally of the North, save for that brief truce in the Great War against the dead. But if Robb Stark claimed a dragon, what new future might be possible? Some hearts leapt at the possibility of the North holding such power, others shrank in dread of possible consequences. Yet it was done. The vow had been spoken publicly. Over the following days, word spread across the castle and beyond. Ravens were dispatched to the major seats of Westeros, announcing the new pact. Jon oversaw a small ceremonial affair in which Robb approached Rhaegal in the courtyard once more, this time in front of assembled lords and soldiers. The dragon stood proud but docile as Robb ran a hand down the beast's flank. It was a mesmerizing sight, and a hush fell over those in attendance. Even the cynics held their tongues. When Robb tentatively climbed onto Rhaegal's back, the crowd gasped. The saddling was rudimentary, fashioned by some of the blacksmiths on Jon's instruction. Jon stood by to intervene if the dragon showed any sign of resistance. Rhaegal snorted, shifting his weight from one clawed foot to the other, as if testing Robb's presence. But after a few tense moments, Rhaegal flexed his massive wings, letting out a reverberating cry that echoed across the courtyard. Soldiers scrambled back. Women gasped. Robb's hands tightened on the leather straps. Jon felt his heart pound. Then, in a flurry of dust and a surge of wind, Rhaegal leapt into the air. His wings created a gale that made cloaks flap and hats sail off. A roar like thunder filled Winterfell's skies. Robb let out an involuntary whoop as the dragon ascended, if only a small ways above the battlements. Rhaegal glided in a wide circle around the castle, his wings pushing against the northern sky. Robb clung to the saddle with white knuckles, but to his credit, he didn't panic or jerk the reins. A blend of fear and exhilaration lit his face. Below, the gathering watched in awe. Never had they seen a Stark astride a dragon. Some knelt, others stared slack-jawed. The flight lasted only a few minutes, a cautious test. Jon suspected Rhaegal sensed Robb's tension and avoided soaring too high. The dragon circled once more, then angled back down toward the courtyard, sending people scattering for fear of being crushed. Rhaegal's landing was heavy, cracking stone pavers. Robb exhaled a breathless laugh, dismounting in a jumble of limbs, but he didn't fall. He turned to face the stunned crowd, chest heaving. A slow grin broke across his face, the grin of a man who had glimpsed something truly wondrous. The courtyard erupted in cheers and murmurs. Jon stepped forward, placing a hand on Rhaegal's muzzle to calm him. The dragon's hot breath misted the cold air. Then he looked at Robb. The difference was immediate. Robb now carried a certain spark in his eyes, a renewed sense of possibility. In that moment, Jon believed they might actually pull this off, forging a realm united by respect rather than fear. Still, the practicalities were manifold. Over the coming weeks, they trained each day, Robb and Jon taking turns ensuring Rhaegal grew accustomed to the new saddle, to the new rider's commands. Jon gave pointers on how to shift weight, how to read Rhaegal's mood, how to handle sudden gusts of wind. Much as Daenerys had once struggled to figure out the nuances of flight, Robb faced the challenge with determination and the same discipline he had shown in learning the art of war. Jon was patient, careful not to overshadow Robb's bond with the dragon. He wanted Rhaegal to answer to Robb, not simply follow Jon's presence. Over time, Robb developed his own approach, gentle coaxing rather than force, praising Rhaegal with calm words and a steady hand. The beast responded, forging a growing trust. The bond was not yet the stuff of legend, but each day it solidified. News traveled quickly throughout the north and beyond. From the Riverlands to the Reach, whispers spread that the north had tamed a dragon. Some doubted the reports, calling them tall tales. Others worried about the political implications. But the effect was undeniable. House Stark's prestige rose and more lords began sending envoys to Winterfell, seeking alliances or forging trade deals. The Vale, the Riverlands, even what was left of the Westerlands after the downfall of House Lannister, all seemed open to cooperating with a north that wielded a dragon's might. That cooperation took time to solidify into actual improvements in the realm. Crops had to be replanted, villages rebuilt. Armies had to be reduced or repurposed into labor forces to repair roads, canals, and ports. The common folk yearned for normalcy after years of war. Jon, for his part, threw himself into these efforts, riding with Robb's vassals to ensure roads were cleared for trade. He had no taste for commanding from a castle. He rode among the people, seeing their struggles firsthand. Sometimes he would fly with Robb on Rhaegal's back, surveying the wide plains south of Winterfell to identify villages in most need of help. "Look there," Jon said once, pointing to a cluster of smoking chimneys far below. They were passing near a hamlet that had been partly burned in the chaos of roving bandits. "We should land. They might need aid." Robb nodded, guiding Rhaegal gently into a spiraling descent. The beast's roar and the gust of wind from his wings announced their arrival long before they landed. Villagers scattered or fell to their knees, terrified. But Robb leapt down from the saddle and lifted his arms in a calming gesture. "Fear not," he called. "We come to help." Jon followed, landing lightly beside Robb, his cloak whipping in the downdraft. He saw the flicker of doubt in the villagers' eyes, the suspicion that they might be new conquerors. But Jon's calm stance and earnest expression soon soothed some of that fear. A few of the braver souls stepped forward, explaining that a group of outlaws had torched a few homesteads, stealing grain. The local lords' men were spread too thin to chase them off. Some had fled. Others cowered behind locked doors. Robb listened intently, jaw set. "We'll send word to Winterfell, have a detachment come. We can also coordinate with the Riverlands for extra supplies." He placed a reassuring hand on one old man's shoulder. "You won't be left to starve or freeze." The old man stared at him and then at the dragon looming behind them. Tears glistened in his eyes, perhaps from relief or sheer shock. He bowed stiffly. "Thank you, lord. I never thought I'd see a dragon come to help us rather than burn us." Jon's chest tightened at those words. That was precisely the shift he hoped for, a people who saw dragons as protectors, not terrors. It would not happen overnight, but each small act of kindness, each sign of good faith, would slowly mend the realm's trust. When they flew back to Winterfell, Robb's posture was thoughtful. He spoke to Jon once they dismounted. "We've spent so many years fighting. Sometimes I wonder if we can truly piece it all back together." Jon looked up at him. "We can. But it won't be quick or easy. It starts with men like us doing what we can." Robb gave a small smile and clapped Jon on the back. "We'll see it done." In truth, the quiet heroics of traveling to needy hamlets, forging trade pacts, and ensuring outlaws were driven out became their routine for months. Winters gave way to a tenuous spring, and the North's fields gradually showed the green shoots of new growth. The contrails of war remained, burned-out villages, mass graves, families missing fathers or mothers. Yet a cautious optimism took root. People spoke of the king in the north and his brother, the dragon rider of House Targaryen, as a sign that the kingdom was not truly shattered beyond repair. Letters came from across Westeros. Gendry Baratheon wrote from Storm's End, sharing news of efforts to salvage fleets along the Shipbreaker Bay. He hinted at the need for alliances, possibly an arranged marriage to solidify ties with the north. Jon smiled at that. The realm always seemed to come back to marriages, forging ties of blood. But for once he found a sense of hope in such a prospect. If the houses of old truly joined in peace, maybe the realm's tapestry would mend. A raven arrived from what remained of House Martell in Dorne, announcing that they would send an envoy to meet with Robb in Winterfell, hoping to re-establish trade routes. From the Iron Islands, a reformed local council stated they wished to maintain their new independence but offered to open their ports to the North ships. Everywhere, the tide seemed to be turning, albeit slowly. Each house, each region, was exhausted, wanting no more war. The threat of another dragon conquest was perhaps overshadowed by the promise that this time, the dragon was an ally, not a conqueror. Sometime that summer, word arrived that a large host of bandits was gathered near the ruined castle of Moat Cailin, preying on travelers. With so many roads in disrepair, merchants and refugees often passed through that region, making them ripe targets for brigands. Robb decided enough was enough. He summoned a force of loyal bannermen, small but capable, and asked Jon to join him on Dragonback for a swift campaign. They marched south along the King's Road, picking up stragglers and chasing away smaller pockets of outlaws. By the time they reached Moat Cailin's broken towers, the bandit group had holed themselves up behind the half-collapsed fortifications. In the past, this might have meant a lengthy siege. But Robb had a dragon. He and Jon surveyed the sight from the air, Rhaegal swooping low enough for them to see panicked men scurrying below. From the vantage of the sky, it took little more than a single pass and a roar of flames to force the bandits into surrender. Robb, mindful of the vow to use the dragon only to protect, limited Rhaegal's fire to the outskirts, ensuring they put fear into the enemy but didn't indiscriminately slaughter them. The brigands, outmatched and terrified, threw down their arms. Robb offered them a choice: lay down their weapons, swear fealty to the new order, or face the consequences. Half of them surrendered on the spot. The others fled into the marshes, where they were soon rounded up by Stark cavalry. Jon, watching from Rhaegal's harness, felt a pang of unease. Even used justly, dragonfire was a fearsome thing. He recalled how easily Daenerys's rage had turned King's Landing to ash. Yet he saw in Robb a restraint that mirrored Ned Stark's sense of honor. Perhaps that made all the difference. After that swift victory, the king in the north continued to push forward with reform. He established a circuit of traveling judges to bring order to the smaller towns that had lost their lords or had no stable leadership. He started an initiative to rebuild the holdfasts along the neck, ensuring safe passage from north to south. Bit by bit, the roads once again carried goods and travelers without constant fear. And all the while, Rhaegal's presence loomed as a silent guardian in the skies above. His roars became a source of strange reassurance for the folk of the north. Children would race outside to see him pass overhead, marveling at the flight of a creature they had only heard of in stories. In some villages, traveling singers took to composing ballads of the Stark dragon, weaving a new legend from the old. Meanwhile, Jon guided Robb on every aspect of caring for Rhaegal, from feeding to ensuring the dragon found suitable lairs in the winter. In return, Robb relied on Jon's counsel for the more complicated political matters, trusting that Jon's experiences in the south might guide them away from the pitfalls of tyranny. As the months turned into a year, a rudimentary stability returned to the realm. With the Iron Throne vacant and King's Landing in partial ruin, many looked to Robb Stark for leadership even beyond the north. Yet Robb did not style himself King of the Seven Kingdoms. He kept the title king in the north, but he welcomed envoys from other regions, forging a loose coalition of kingdoms rather than a single realm under one crown. It was a new approach, one that allowed each region a degree of autonomy while still binding them in mutual defense and trade. The fact that Robb rode a dragon certainly helped deter any challengers to this arrangement. A grand council was proposed to be held in the Riverlands, where each major house or ruling body would send representatives to discuss how best to govern Westeros in this new era. Jon was among those who traveled south with Robb, Rhaegal flying overhead in an awe-inspiring escort. The small folk flocked to see the spectacle, some waving Northern or Targaryen banners. Others kept their distance, fearful of the dragon's might. But the mood overall was hopeful. War-weary lords and ladies were prepared to talk rather than fight. At Harrenhal, a castle that once knew the horror of dragonfire, they convened. The irony was not lost on anyone. The hall still bore the scars of Aegon's conquest, its towers melted and twisted. Yet here they gathered to speak of peace. The northern delegation was the largest, joined by the River Lords, the Vale's envoy, a representative from the Iron Islands, Gendry Baratheon from the Stormlands, the few remaining Tyrell vassals from the Reach, and a small but proud party from Dorne led by the new head of House Martell. In the echoing remains of Harrenhal's great hall, Robb Stark stood before them all, with Jon at his side. Rhaegal was perched outside, occasionally letting out a roar that reverberated through the blackened walls. Lords and ladies cast nervous glances toward the dragon's direction, but no one dared voice open hostility, not in a gathering meant for unification. Robb addressed them. "I stand here not as a conqueror, but as a man who has known too much death. Our families have killed one another for too many years. We've seen the dead themselves rise to kill us all. My dear friend and brother, Jon Snow, has offered me his dragon so that I might keep the peace. We propose a new order. Each region keeps its own king or lord paramount. Each region governs itself. But we come together for mutual defense and prosperity. We come together so that no single house can trample the rest underfoot. We've had enough of that. Enough of crowns soaked in blood." There were nods, some murmurs of agreement. A few voices, notably from the remnants of the Westerlands, seemed hesitant. But none challenged him outright. They had all seen what dragons could do. Gendry Baratheon cleared his throat. "Storm's End will agree to that. We've had enough war to last generations." A tall, dark-haired noblewoman from Dorne, wearing the Sun and Spear sigil, added, "Dorne will gladly stand in this new coalition, if it means no more forced tyranny by any one house." Lord Royce from the Vale, standing in for Robin Arryn, who was still quite young, gave a grave nod. "The Vale stands with the North. We respect House Stark's leadership in forging this alliance." Slowly, each region's representative added their voice. Even the Iron Islands, though they insisted on their custom of choosing their own ruler, conceded that cooperating with the rest of Westeros for trade and mutual defense would be preferable to their current isolation. The Westerlands were the last, but eventually their new lord, a lesser Lannister cousin who had survived the fall of Casterly Rock, bowed. "We accept as well. Our lands are in ruins and we have no desire for more conflict." Thus, a fragile but genuine pact was formed, bound not by one throne but by a council of rulers, each acknowledging the king in the north and his dragon as the foremost protectors of the realm. They wrote and signed documents, hammered out trade agreements, and pledged to come to one another's aid if any threat, foreign or domestic, reared its head. It was a far cry from the strong central monarchy that had once ruled from King's Landing, but perhaps that was what Westeros needed now, not a single iron fist, but a tapestry of allied leaders, each invested in peace. Over the course of those weeks at Harrenhal, Jon moved quietly among the delegations, helping smooth over disputes, encouraging them to see the bigger picture. He had little interest in the politics of kings and lords, but he understood the necessity of cooperation. Each time an argument threatened to boil over, the faint roar of Rhaegal from outside the castle reminded them all of the cost of returning to war. One evening, after a day of negotiations, Jon found Robb in the courtyard, leaning against a section of melted black stone. The summer twilight stretched across the sky, and Rhaegal dozed on a nearby slope, his rhythmic breathing like distant thunder. Jon approached silently. Robb had a distant look in his eyes, as though lost in memory. "Is everything all right?" Jon asked gently. Robb sighed. "I was thinking of father. Of all he stood for. Honor, duty, protecting those who cannot protect themselves." This, he gestured to the battered towers of Harrenhal and the clusters of tents where the lords camped. "This might be the closest we ever get to that ideal." Lords from every corner of Westeros coming together not out of fear or subjugation, but because it's the right thing to do. Jon nodded. Ned Stark would be proud. Robb glanced at him. And what of you, Jon? You've given me your dragon. You've forsaken any claim to the throne. You could have ruled the realm if you wished. Jon stared at the ground. I never wanted it. You know that. If I can help build a better world without sitting on a throne, that's enough. Robb studied him for a moment, then gave a half-smile. You're a better man than most. We wouldn't have come this far without you, you know? Jon shook his head. We've done it together. And we still have far to go. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the sun sank beneath the horizon. Jon felt a gentle warmth in his chest, a sense of belonging that he had seldom known. Here he was, side by side with Robb Stark, forging a new peace in a place that once symbolized the worst of dragonfire and war. If there was hope in this broken realm, it was in these quiet moments of unity, the sense that the old feuds might actually give way to something better. The following morning, the Grand Council concluded, with each party returning to their domains to implement the agreements. Robb and Jon prepared to depart, saddling Rhaegal outside Harrenhal's gates. A crowd of onlookers, lords, ladies, soldiers, and servants gathered to watch the king in the north mount his dragon. Few had seen such a sight in person. The older generation remembered the terror the Targaryen dragons once inspired, but this day was different. There was something hopeful in the air. Instead of screams, there were hushed murmurs of wonder. Robb extended a hand to Jon, helping him climb up behind the saddle's harness, though Jon needed little assistance. They settled into place, each gripping a strap. Robb gave a gentle nudge with his heels, and Rhaegal tensed. With a thunderous leap, the dragon lifted off, his green scales flashing in the early sun. Wind whipped at Jon's face as they soared above Harrenhal's melted towers, casting a broad shadow across the courtyard below. Cheers rose from the watchers, echoing off the ancient walls. They circled once over the riverlands, the wide expanse of the trident glimmering in the distance. Then Robb urged Rhaegal north, and the dragon angled his wings, climbing higher into the clear sky. Jon felt his heart hammer in his chest, that familiar rush of flight mingled with the knowledge of what they had just accomplished, forging a new structure for Westeros built on unity rather than conquest. The flight home was long, but they took it in strides, occasionally landing to give Rhaegal rest and to speak with local lords. At each stop, Robb and Jon were greeted with cautious reverence. Word of the council's outcome had already begun to spread. The nights they spent under the stars felt almost peaceful. In the quiet campfires, Robb would share stories, or they'd reminisce about the old days in Winterfell, about how they never imagined they'd be here. Jon often thought of Arya, Sansa, and Bran, wondering how they would react to the changed realm. He hoped they would find joy in it, in the knowledge that House Stark had persevered and, in many ways, triumphed without losing its honor. When at last they crested the horizon and beheld the familiar walls of Winterfell, Jon felt an unexpected surge of emotion. This ancient seat of House Stark had been threatened by White Walkers, by betrayal, by war, but it stood firm. Now, the world outside was no longer quite so hostile. Dragons were not an enemy but a shared emblem of hope. The moment they landed in Winterfell's courtyard, soldiers rushed forward to greet them, stable hands carrying barrels of fresh meat for Rhaegal. Jon dismounted, feeling the ache in his muscles from the long ride, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Robb slid down with practiced ease, running a hand along Rhaegal's neck. The dragon rumbled in contentment, then folded his massive wings, allowing the stable hands to lead him to his feeding enclosure. The king in the north turned to Jon, a wry smirk on his face. I suppose we should check on the repairs. There's always more work to be done. Jon nodded. Always. He paused, scanning the faces in the courtyard. People seemed genuinely glad to see them return safely. But it's work worth doing. Thus began the next chapter of their shared labor, upholding the fragile alliance they had formed. Letters and delegates flowed in and out of Winterfell. Robb worked tirelessly with his council, enacting policies that aimed at fairness and mutual support between regions. He was careful, too, to ensure no one felt overshadowed by the dragon. Rhaegal was used sparingly, for travel and defense, not as a show of force to bully lesser lords. The seeds they had planted seemed to take root. Banditry declined as local lords gained the confidence to patrol their lands again. Trade flourished along reopened roads. Pockets of farmland near the neck were reclaimed. Gendry sent word that Storm's End was rebuilding a modest navy, prepared to defend the coast should any threat come from overseas. Dorne reported success in revitalizing its famed orchard trade. Even the Westerlands, though still deeply scarred by war, began to restore their mines and forges, seeking an honest coin through trade rather than forced tribute. Jon spent his days advising Robb, helping travelers find safe routes, or venturing out into the field to mediate disputes. He often stayed near Rhaegal's paddock, ensuring the dragon remained well cared for and content. Sometimes he simply marveled at how differently this all could have turned out. If fate had twisted another way, if Robb had died at the Twins, if Daenerys had never descended on Westeros, if the White Walkers had triumphed. But none of those dark scenarios had come to pass. Through some combination of luck, resilience, and the choices they had made, Westeros stood a chance at a peaceful future. Of course, not everyone embraced the new era. Scattered rumors spoke of men who still wanted the Iron Throne restored under a single ruler, or petty lords who longed to seize power. But those voices were faint, overshadowed by the general weariness with war. The memory of Dragonfire was too fresh. Most simply wanted to raise their children in a land where winter was less harsh and wars were less frequent. That modest dream was, in its own way, a powerful unifying force. Seasons turned. The next harvest was bountiful in some regions, modest in others, but enough to ward off famine. With roads safer, caravans passed between the north and the south, hauling grain, timber, furs, and spices. Jon listened with satisfaction when traveling merchants spoke of how the realm had become far more stable than anyone dared hope. They called it the Age of the Wolf and Dragon, an era marked by the alliance between House Stark and the remnant of House Targaryen. Occasionally, Jon would think of Daenerys and how her dream of breaking the wheel might have led here in a roundabout way. Her conquest had shattered the old lines of power, albeit violently. But if this new arrangement brought less suffering, perhaps some good had come of her flame and blood. Jon would never forget what she had done or the tragedy of King's Landing, but he could honor the better parts of her vision by ensuring Rhaegal stood for protection, not destruction. By the time another winter threatened the realm, Robb had effectively solidified his position as a kind of first among equals, the king in the north whose seat in Winterfell was respected by all the other autonomous kingdoms. He seldom left the north, preferring to let trusted envoys handle diplomacy with the south. But that was enough, and the realm seemed content with this arrangement. On a clear day at the end of autumn, Jon stood on Winterfell's ramparts again, much as he had that day when he'd first brought Rhaegal here. The wind had a bite to it, carrying the hint of snowfall soon to come. But he was not alone. Robb joined him, both of them wrapped in thick cloaks. They gazed over the battlements at the rolling fields and forests that stretched beyond. Small folk tended final harvests, gleaning what they could before the snows. It almost feels normal, Robb observed, resting his hands on the cold stone. As if we never left. As if the wars and horrors were just a nightmare. Jon nodded. It does. Though I'll never forget what we saw. The dead rising. Dragons burning the sky. Kings killing kings. But it led us here to this moment. Robb offered a small, grateful smile. I'm thankful you brought me the dragon, Jon. Thankful you believed in this unity. If you hadn't, if you'd kept Rhaegal to yourself or let him wander, I doubt the North or the realm would be faring half as well. Jon shrugged slightly. You're the leader they needed, Robb. I just provided a piece of the puzzle. Besides, the dragon was never truly mine alone. Rhaegal always deserved to be more than a weapon. They stood quietly, the wind tousling their hair. For a moment, Jon could almost see the ghosts of their childhood, a boyish Robb with a wooden sword, Jon trailing behind, longing to belong. Now, they were men who had shaped the fate of kingdoms. The thought was humbling, even a bit surreal. Finally, Robb spoke, voice gentle. Do you ever wish to go beyond the wall again? There's still land up there, free for you if you want it. You were once of the Night's Watch, the free folk accepted you too. Jon sighed, gazing northward. Maybe someday I will. There's something about the far north that calls to me. But I think, for now, I'm where I need to be. This realm, these people, they still need a steady hand. And besides, if the White Walkers ever stir again, or if any other threat emerges, I'll stand ready. Robb nodded, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. You'll always have a place at Winterfell. Brother. A warmth spread through Jon's chest. He thought of all the family they had lost, Ned, Catelyn, Rickon, so many. But the Stark still endured, in him and Robb and the memory of those who had gone before. A new generation of Starks would someday walk these halls, living in a realm reshaped by their unity with House Targaryen's last living flame. They stayed there for a long while, two figures on the walls of Winterfell letting the cold wind swirl around them. In the courtyard, Rhaegal stirred, lifting his head as if sensing their presence. His reptilian eyes found Jon's, then flicked to Robb. If a dragon could smile, perhaps he did. Then he settled back down, content beneath the banner of the dire wolf and the banner of the three-headed dragon that now flew side by side above the gate. Winter would come again, as it always did, but for once there was hope that it would not be a season of endless darkness. The realm was broken no longer, pieced together by the union of wolf and dragon, by the faith of men willing to set aside old wounds and start anew. And if any still doubted that hope, they need only look to the northern skies, where a single dragon soared, no longer an omen of conquest and terror, but a promise that unity and honor could reign over the ashes of war. In that soaring flight, and in the steadfast hearts of those who believed in a better future, Westeros found the seeds of lasting peace. They lingered by the battlements as the day waned. The setting sun turned the skies over Winterfell to a shade of russet, hinting at coming frosts. Jon Snow felt the wind whip against his cheeks, carrying the scents of pine resin and distant hearth fires. Nearby, Robb Stark released a slow breath, lips curling with the first wisp of white as the air chilled further. Below them, in the courtyard, stable hands were guiding Rhaegal into his makeshift enclosure for the evening. Some still gazed at the dragon as though he were a vision pulled from legend, while others had grown used to his presence, though never truly comfortable. It was no small thing to house a beast of living flame. Robb turned to Jon, his expression reflective. Sometimes it's easy to forget the scale of what's happened, standing here as we did in our youth. So much of our family is gone: father, mother, Rickon. The wars and that long night of terror changed everything. Yet here we are, overlooking the same courtyard where we once sparred. Jon watched the stable hands feed Rhaegal, tossing chunks of meat into the dragon's waiting maw. I think about it often. Growing up, I didn't know who I truly was. A bastard, I thought, no mother, no claim to anything. Now I stand here with Targaryen blood next to the king in the north, forging alliances across the realm. Life has a strange way of unfolding. Robb's mouth curled into a wry smile. Strange indeed. His hand, clad in a thick glove, rested briefly on Jon's forearm. But I couldn't ask for a better partner in all this. They stayed until the last flickers of daylight sank beyond the far horizon. A hush fell over Winterfell as folk turned in, the torches in the yard blazing against the dusk. Presently, they went down together, finding warmth in the great hall. The ancient walls were hung with stark banners and braziers to keep the chill at bay. Servants scurried to lay out the evening meal: bread, hot stew, and ale. It was simple fare, for the North's harvest had only just begun to find its footing after years of war and the crippling winter. Even so, there was a lively hum about the hall, a sense that, for once, they could rest without fear of enemies at the gates or the dead rising in the darkness. Robb and Jon settled at the high table. A few of Robb's counselors joined them: Ser Lyman Serwyn, a stern-faced warrior who had once fought at the Whispering Wood, Lord Medgar Serwyn's cousin, filling in the role of Castellan when the Lord himself was ill, and Lady Alice Glover, who had recently stepped up to lead her house after her father's passing. Conversation drifted over the day's minor concerns: grain stores, the roads north of Last Hearth, the possibility of refortifying Deepwood Motte to secure the western coastline. Jon listened more than he spoke. He had gained a reputation for quiet observation, weighing every angle before giving his view. Eventually, Robb eased away from the table, and Jon did likewise. They took their meals upstairs to the solar, a smaller room with a hearth that radiated comforting heat. There, they could speak freely without the ears of half a dozen lords pricking at every word. Robb sank into a chair with a tired sigh. "King in the north," he muttered, half wry. "Sometimes I feel more like a village headman than a king, deciding who gets the last of the barley, whose roof can be repaired first, how many spears we need in each holdfast. But that's what the people need now, I suppose." Jon lowered himself into the opposite chair. He had a wooden bowl of stew in hand, steam curling over chunks of meat and potato. They need good leadership and a touch of normalcy. I remember back when I was a boy here, I never understood half the things Ned Stark had to oversee. But I see it now. These quiet details are what truly hold a realm together. And the dragon helps, Robb added with a small grin. No lord or petty bandit king can seriously threaten us when they know we can be at their doorstep by sky within a day or two. The fear of dragon fire is real. We haven't used it in any large-scale way beyond that show at Moat Cailin, but it's enough. Jon's gaze flicked to the window where darkness pressed against the glass. Beyond that darkness, Rhaegal likely nestled in his enclosure, a comfortable stone platform warmed by straw and torches. "I'm just glad you use him sparingly." When dragons are used too often, it only encourages more terror, more resentment. We have a chance to show Westeros a different way, one that doesn't require the subjugation Aegon once imposed. Robb nodded. Aye. Besides, Rhaegal is precious. I'd sooner not risk him in every minor skirmish. His presence alone is a deterrent. He pushed the stew around in his bowl, thinking. We should send out more envoys soon, though. The initial rush of the Grand Council at Harrenhal was promising, but we need to keep the lines open. The realm's memory is short. If we don't keep the trust alive, old suspicions might come creeping back. Jon agreed. We could start with Gendry Baratheon. He wrote last moon saying Storm's End was faring better, but he asked for more direct ties with the North. Robb let out a soft laugh. An alliance by marriage? He's not the first to hint at it. Plenty of younger siblings and cousins among the northern houses might jump at the chance to wed into a lordship in the Stormlands. Or perhaps Gendry wants something else, trade, mutual defense. We can see what he has in mind. They spoke a while longer, shaping the future in the simple flicker of firelight. Though they were men who had fought in wars and seen unspeakable horrors, they found a quiet satisfaction in these more mundane tasks, rebuilding a land so thoroughly scarred. The next morning, Jon was awakened by a soft knock on his chamber door. He pulled on a tunic and opened it to see a steward, a boy of some 15 summers, wide-eyed. My lord, or your grace's brother. Jon smiled gently to put the lad at ease. Just Jon. The boy nodded, swallowing. Forgive me, Sir Jon. Lord Serwyn says a raven has come from the Vale. Urgent word. King Robb asks for you in the Great Hall. Jon thanked the boy and made haste. He sensed a mild tension stirring in Winterfell's corridors, servants hurrying, guard patrols moving with purpose. Entering the Great Hall, he found Robb and several others clustered round the stone dais. A scroll lay unrolled on the table. What's happened? Jon asked, stepping forward. Robb looked up, brow creased. Lord Royce sent word. Some lords in the Vale are restless. There's talk of rebellious activity near the Bloody Gate, small scale for now, but they're worried it could spread. Jon exhaled. Rebellious in what sense? Against the newly forged council or against the Vale's own leadership? Robb tapped a finger on the parchment. Both, it seems. The Vale remains under the rule of young Lord Robin Arryn, with Royce effectively acting as caretaker. A group of mountain clans, recently armed, possibly from hidden caches left during the war, have been attacking travelers near the high passes. They claim they want no part of any alliance with the Starks, dragons, or otherwise. The lords of the Vale have reached out for help to quell the threat. Jon's lips pressed into a thin line. The clans were always trouble, but never so bold. They must feel the Vale's leadership is stretched thin, or maybe they sense an opportunity in the realm's reorganization. So, what do? We help, Robb said without hesitation. These alliances aren't just words on parchment. We stand by our vow. Royce is requesting a modest force. The mountain clans rarely exceed a few hundred fighters, though they can be quite fierce. We have our northern cavalry to spare, enough men who can handle rough terrain. Jon nodded. We could send a detachment under a trusted commander. But the mountain passes can be treacherous for large forces. And if the clans scatter into the hills, it could be a drawn-out chase. Robb's eyes flickered with that thoughtful, careful look Ned Stark once had. I'll lead them myself. If we bring Rhaegal, the clans will think twice about open conflict. We'll approach carefully. I don't plan to incinerate them for the sake of proving a point, but they should see the strength behind these alliances. Jon wasn't surprised. Robb often took to the field personally, preferring to show his men that he would not hide in Winterfell while they risked their lives. But a caution nagged at Jon. If they have crossbows or scorpion-like weapons, it could pose a danger to Rhaegal. The Vale once fought the Targaryens with some success in the distant past, or at least they withstood sieges from the outside. But I doubt these mountain clans have advanced siege tools. Robb set the scroll aside. We'll remain vigilant. Will you come with me? Jon glanced at the map. The scale of reconstruction in the north had finally reached a plateau of stability enough that he wouldn't be leaving them in dire straits. Aye. I'll come. 2 riders on Rhaegal as we've done. A small force of skilled cavalry plus maybe a handful of men on foot who know mountainous terrain, House Manderly scouts, or perhaps some from House Flint. They'd have the best sense for rough ground. Robb smoothed the edge of the parchment, eyes brightening as he settled on a plan. Let's do it then. We'll leave within 3 days. That should give us time to gather a suitable force. Within hours, ravens were dispatched. The lords of the north who owed fealty to House Stark were informed of the plan. A call went out for volunteers who were comfortable riding or marching in the perilous slopes. A small group of archers from Deepwood Motte was summoned, as well as some men known for their skill in tracking. In all, about 200 mounted soldiers and another 100 foot would follow the king in the north. Jon marveled again at how swiftly Robb could mobilize. It was a sign that even after the wars, the north remained vigilant. During those 3 days of preparation, Winterfell thrummed with renewed energy. Blacksmiths hammered out fresh horseshoes and arrowheads. Quartermasters tallied supplies, ensuring each man would have enough provisions to last the journey into the Vale. Meanwhile, Rhaegal sensed the coming excitement, letting out low rumbles whenever the courtyard clattered with activity. Jon spent time with the dragon each morning, checking his harness, examining his scales for any sign of injury. Rhaegal seemed in fine spirits. He had grown used to flights around the north, short though they often were. On the dawn of the third day, their host assembled in Winterfell's main courtyard. A crisp morning light sparkled on steel helms and spear points. Horses stamped, breath steaming in the cold. Robb rode at the head, wearing a simple yet distinguished set of plate and mail, the stark dire wolf emblazoned on the breast. Jon wore more modest armor, though he carried Longclaw at his side, the Valyrian steel sword he had long called friend. He climbed onto Rhaegal's saddle behind Robb, gripping a reinforced strap. Nearby, a troop of men on horseback murmured in awe at the sight of their king astride a dragon. In a swirl of wind and the thunderous clap of wings, Rhaegal launched himself upward. Men cheered, some out of pride, some out of sheer adrenaline at witnessing the dragon's power. The cavalry formed rank below, ready to follow along the King's Road, while Rhaegal soared overhead as a watchful guardian. It would take the riders nearly half again as long to reach the Vale, so Robb and Jon decided on a measured pace. Rhaegal could alight each evening to camp with the main column, ensuring that no one fell behind. The first leg of the journey south was uneventful. The land they passed showed signs of slow but steady recovery, farmers plowing fields that hadn't been plowed in years, blackened ruins replaced by new houses. Occasionally, small folk gathered at crossroads just to see the dragon pass overhead. Many had never laid eyes on a dragon in their lives, and while some cowered, others shouted words of welcome or amazement. They crossed the neck without incident, the causeways mostly repaired from the damage of passing armies years prior. Moat Caelin's battered towers still stood, but a small garrison loyal to Robb kept them secure. Further south, they entered the Riverlands, where the scars of war were more visible. Fields still littered with debris, burnt-out holdfasts turned to rubble. Yet each time they landed, local folk approached with more trust than fear, remarking that at least now there was a chance to rebuild under the new arrangement. Robb listened to their petitions, while Jon took note of anything that might require further assistance once they returned to Winterfell. They would send more supplies or perhaps coordinate with Edmure Tully, who was slowly re-establishing House Tully's governance from Riverrun. But their sights were set on the Vale, so they pressed east, following the foothills until the mountains of the moon loomed ahead, sharp peaks cutting into the sky. The temperature dropped, snow lingering in the higher altitudes even though it was only autumn. Jon felt a flutter of memory. 1,000 leagues away, the wall had once stood as an even grander barrier. But the wall was no longer an immediate worry. They had left those days behind, though he suspected his heart would never truly forget them. Lord Royce had stationed watchers at the Bloody Gate, the famed entrance to the Vale's interior. When they spied Rhaegal overhead, horns sounded. Robb guided the dragon to land in a narrow clearing just above the gate, carefully picking a spot wide enough for Rhaegal's wings. Royce himself, clad in heavy plate etched with runes, a testament to the Vale's ancient heritage, stepped forward. He bowed his head to Robb, then greeted Jon with the courtesy one might show a prince. "Your Grace and Lord Jon, it's an honor to have you here," said Royce in his deep, measured voice. "I wish it were under better circumstances." Robb dismounted with practiced ease. Jon followed, patting Rhaegal's shoulder to keep him calm. The dragon folded his wings, tail swishing over the rocky ground. "We came as soon as we could," Robb told Royce. "I have 200 cavalry and 100 foot on their way through the pass. Should be here by tomorrow. Once they arrive, we can plan our next move." Royce nodded, relief plain on his face. "We'll billet them here at the Bloody Gate for the night, or as many as we can fit. There's a plateau beyond where they might camp as well. The clans have grown bolder in recent weeks. They come down at night, raiding small holdings in the high valleys. We've tried sending patrols, but they ambush us from the rocks, then vanish. It's a cat-and-mouse game. Robb glanced at Jon. We may need to flush them out or corner them, but climbing into those mountains is dangerous. Perhaps a show of force, Rhaegal over their hideouts, will cause them to rethink. If not, we'll deal with them carefully. Royce, looking at the dragon's hulking form, allowed himself a small, grim smile. I doubt the clans can remain indifferent to that sort of display. Even if they once prided themselves on never bending knee to the Aerie, a dragon might be another matter. Jon felt a bit of unease. He hated relying on intimidation, but it was sometimes the best means to prevent a bloody battle. We'll try to talk first, he said, glancing at Robb, who nodded in agreement. If there's a way to reach some truce or offer them an arrangement, land or supplies in return for peace, it might spare many lives. Royce's brow tightened. They've never taken kindly to diplomacy, but I won't gainsay your attempt. Better that than endless skirmishes. They spent the evening at the Bloody Gates fortress, a squat but sturdy set of towers that controlled the main pass. Rhaegal perched on a wide ledge overlooking the valley, drawing fascinated stares from the gate's garrison. Robb and Jon dined in the keep's hall, coarse bread, salt beef, and a flagon of ale. Royce explained more of the clan's tactics. How they'd stolen steel from fallen knights during the war, how they used goat trails and hidden ravines to appear where least expected. He also mentioned rumors that someone might be arming them more directly, but it was unconfirmed. Jon and Robb traded concerned looks at that. The realm was rife with black market weapons, cast-off armaments from the many armies that had once clashed. It wouldn't be shocking if some enterprising smuggler was fueling the troubles to turn a profit. When dawn broke, the northern cavalry arrived in disciplined ranks. Robb addressed them personally, riding along their lines and thanking them for their swift march. The men lit up with pride at their king's presence and the knowledge that Rhaegal soared overhead. Once they rested a short while, the company moved deeper into the Vale, guided by Royce's scouts. The terrain was challenging, sheer cliffs, narrow passes, and winding slopes dotted with scree that threatened to send a horse to its doom if ridden carelessly. Jon admired the skill of the northern riders who handled it all with calm poise. The foot soldiers, more agile on steep ground, fanned out to guard the flanks. Rhaegal circled above, occasionally letting out a roar that echoed off the peaks. By midday, they reached a high plateau known as Raven's Crest, where rumors placed a large cluster of clan fighters. Some time ago, a minor fortress had stood there, more a watchtower than a proper castle. It was now a ruin of crumbled stone. The scouts reported fires seen on the ridge, likely the clan's encampment. Robb decided to approach openly. He didn't want them scattering before negotiations could happen. Jon readied himself. He knew that confronting hill tribes was tricky business. At best, they might shout insults and retreat to higher ground. At worst, they'd launch a volley of arrows and charge. But Robb wanted to try. So they dismounted with a small retinue of men while Rhaegal landed behind them, the dragon's presence looming as a statement that the king in the north was not to be trifled with. They hadn't gone far into the rubble of the old tower when rough voices rang out from above. A hail of stones rolled down, clattering off shields and armor. No one was harmed, but it was a clear warning. Robb raised a hand, calling up, "We do not come to slaughter you. We come to treat." A guttural laugh echoed in the thin air. "We need no treaties with kneelers," a voice growled. A man stepped onto a ledge overhead wearing patchwork furs and a battered helm. Jon recognized him by description, one-eyed Ulla, a warrior lord among the clan folk. Ulla squinted down at them, his single eye fierce. "You think to frighten us with that beast behind you? The Falcon Lords tried once. We hid in our caves. We always return." Robb stood firm, voice resonating with the crisp authority that had rallied men on countless battlefields. "Rhaegal is not here to burn you. Not unless you force our hand. We offer a chance to talk, to find peace. War has raged across Westeros for too long. Surely you grow tired of constant raids." Another shape emerged, a woman, tall and wiry, brandishing a short bow. She spat from the rocky ledge. "Tired? We live for the fight. The Vale Lords would starve us, keep us caged in the mountains while they feast in the green fields below. We take what is ours." Robb pressed on. "And how long can that last? If you continue these raids, we'll have no choice but to drive you out. But there's another way." The new alliance in the realm allows for more freedoms. If your people would come down and swear to keep the peace, the Vale could grant you some footholds in the lower valleys, land to farm, protection under law. A cacophony of jeering followed. "We are free men, not kneelers," someone shouted. Another chunk of rock tumbled down. Jon motioned for the men to hold their shields overhead. One-eyed Ulla grinned savagely. "We've heard these tales before. The Lord's promised land, but they want our heads. You cannot buy us with sweet words. Turn back, or test your beast's flame. We are not afraid." Robb's jaw clenched. This was exactly what he'd hoped to avoid, a senseless clash. Jon stepped forward, risking a glance upward. "We fought the dead together once, you know. The entire realm united. I was there when the clans from these mountains joined the Knights of the Vale to push back the others at the Battle of the Bastards." He recalled that some of the tribes had indeed shown up on various fields, though the memory was hazy given all the chaos of that war. "You stood with us against a greater enemy. Do you not remember?" A few voices muttered uncertainly. The tall woman lowered her bow a fraction, flicking her gaze among her fellow clansmen. The men around her shifted, recalling, perhaps, the stories of White Walkers and the king with the dire wolf banner. But Ulla spat, shaking his shaggy mane. "That was then. Now we see you cozy with the Falcon Lords again. The same ones who starve our children in winter. You think we'll just roll over?" Robb opened his mouth to reply, but the woman cut him off, her voice echoing sharply. "Enough talk. You say you don't come to slaughter us. Yet you bring steel and that monstrous lizard. A wolf in a sheep's coat. That's what you are." Jon ground his teeth. This was going nowhere. Robb, seeing the same, let out a slow breath. "Then you leave us no choice. We cannot stand by while you raid the Vale. We offered terms, you refused. If any of you wish to parley more peacefully, come forward now. Otherwise, step away and let us pass." For a moment, no one moved. The cluster of clan folk on the ledge stared down, their faces harsh in the midday glare. Then Ulla barked an order in a guttural dialect, and a volley of arrows rained down. The northern soldiers raised shields, some arrows glancing off with metallic clangs, while others thudded into the ground. Robb reacted swiftly. He signaled his men to take defensive positions, then turned to Jon. "We can't negotiate like this. Let's fall back. We'll flush them from their perch with a show of fire, not to kill them all, just to drive them out." Jon hated the necessity of it. Yet the clans had made their stance clear. As more arrows pelted the ground, he and Robb withdrew behind a broken stone wall where their men clustered. Then Robb motioned toward Rhaegal, who stirred from his waiting spot in the clearing. The dragon's keen eyes fixed on the ledge, where the raiders poured down more rocks and arrows. A few northern archers sent shafts in return, but the distance and angles were tricky. Jon hurried to Rhaegal's side, pressing a hand to the dragon's flank. "Steady," he murmured, feeling the powerful ripple of muscle and the intense heat that seemed to radiate from within. Robb climbed up first, strapping himself in. Jon followed, making sure their harness was secured. If Rhaegal soared too high, the archers might lose their vantage, but the plan was only to make a pass, a short burst of flame to scare them off the heights. With a mighty down sweep of his wings, Rhaegal rose, sending dust swirling. The clans cried out as the dragon bore down on them, the sun glinting off emerald scales. Jon caught glimpses of wide-eyed terror beneath furs and crude helms. Rhaegal's roar shook the air, a thunderous sound reverberating through the canyons. Then Robb urged him closer to the rocky slope. "Just the rock face," Robb called over the wind. "We drive them back, not burn them alive." Jon braced himself as Rhaegal unleashed a torrent of flame along the upper ridge, well above where most of the clansmen stood. Flames scorched the stone in a sweeping arc, sending sparks and smoke billowing. Screams rang out as the clans realized their position was untenable. Fire overhead, heavily armed soldiers below. Some scrambled back into caves, others fled along the ridgeline. The volley of arrows ceased almost at once. Rhaegal hovered momentarily, wings beating the air, his roar echoing through the pass. Then Robb guided him to circle back. From that vantage, Jon could see that many of the clansmen had scattered, some dropping their weapons in the rush to escape. A few bodies lay where they'd been struck by arrows from the northern archers. It was a grim sight, but it could have been far worse had Rhaegal unleashed a direct assault. Let's land, Robb said, voice grim. We'll see if any remain who want to talk now. They touched down on the plateau. Northern soldiers fanned out with caution. Smoke rose from scorched stone, carrying a tang of heated rock and burnt vegetation. The clans who had survived were nowhere to be seen. Likely they fled deeper into the mountains. Robb's gaze swept the carnage, maybe half a dozen fallen clan warriors, a handful more wounded or dying. A low moan reached Jon's ears. He found a wounded man propped against a boulder, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Blood seeped through his furs. The man looked up at Jon with a mix of fear and defiance, as though expecting the finishing blow. Instead, Jon knelt beside him, calling for the maester's assistant who traveled with their host. "You'll live if the wound is bound," Jon said quietly. "We had no wish to kill you. You fired on us." The man's lips curled in a sneer, but the pain in his eyes betrayed desperation. "We won't bow. Better to die free." He coughed, wincing. "Go on. Kill me, Dragonspawn." Jon shook his head, beckoning the assistant to apply a tourniquet. "You might die if we do nothing. Will you accept help?" "Go to the seven hells," he spat, though he didn't fight as the bandage was secured. Jon recognized the complexities of mountain clan honor. Often they'd refuse direct aid, yet in truth, few men truly wished to die of a festering wound. The difference between pride and survival was razor-thin. Robb approached, scanning the slope. "Any sign of Ola or the tall woman?" One of their scouts shrugged. "Gone, I expect. They know these paths better than we do." Robb exhaled heavily. "We've chased them off this ridge, but that's all. They'll regroup elsewhere." He turned to Jon. "We can keep chasing them from outpost to outpost until we wear them down. But that might cost more lives, ours and theirs." Jon nodded. "We could block the passes so they can't raid the lower vale. Starve them of resources, perhaps force them into negotiation." Royce joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "The Vale Lords have tried that. They know hidden valleys. They'll just melt into the rock." Robb's lips pressed into a thin line, his face clouded with frustration. "Then we'll have to keep at least until they realize they can't win. I'm not about to massacre them, but I won't let them pillage the Vale either." So began a tense campaign in the mountains. Over the following days, Robb's forces moved from one ridge to another, from hidden vale to treacherous crag. Rhaegal's presence saved them from walking into ambush after ambush. Whenever the clans tried to mount a defensive stand, the dragon's roar and a short burst of flame would scatter them. Some minor skirmishes erupted, with losses on both sides, but nothing large enough to crush the clans entirely. At times, Jon wondered if they were simply driving the mountain folk deeper and deeper into uncharted caves. Between these clashes, Robb and Jon tried sending out envoys under flags of truce. They offered fair terms: small tracts of land in the lower foothills, the chance to trade openly in the Vale's markets if they agreed to abide by the realm's laws. But each attempt ended in jeers or stony silence. The mistrust ran too deep. Camped on a narrow pass one night, Jon and Robb sat beside the campfire, warming their hands. Around them, northern soldiers ate in weary silence. A pair of hunting hounds scrounged for scraps. Above, the stars burned bright in the thin mountain air, and Rhaegal lay curled at the edge of the clearing, occasionally snorting hot breath that fogged in the cold. "How long before we're forced to do something drastic?" Jon asked softly. "We can't camp here indefinitely. Winter will come, and the paths will become impassable." Robb grimaced. "I'd hoped they'd bend, or at least come to terms. But their pride is stone. We might have to station men permanently along the Vale's key trails. That won't fix the root problem, but it'll protect the villages below." Jon considered that. House Aaron might handle permanent garrisons, but it'll strain their resources. "Our men can't remain here forever. You have a realm to oversee." Royce, who had joined them at the fire, rubbed his chin. "I might speak again with the Vale's ruling council. Lady Anya Waynwood, Lady Corbray, they have some dealings with the clans, or did in the past, exchanging iron for rare herbs. Perhaps we can broker a better approach. Maybe promise a formal seat at some local assembly? If the clans had a voice, they might stop seeing the Vale Lords as enemies." Robb's face brightened slightly. "It's worth trying. What good is all our talk of a new realm if we can't solve old grudges? The best hope is giving them a place in the world that doesn't rely on raids." They agreed to regroup. 2 days later, after a few more fruitless chases through the mountains, Robb called his forces back to the Bloody Gate. There, he sent riders to the area, summoning Lady Waynwood and any other Vale nobles who might help. Meanwhile, Rhaegal stood watch, ensuring the clans didn't attempt to strike the fortress itself. The good news was that, for all their bluster, the clans seemed to have lost their taste for direct confrontation with a dragon overhead. The raids had slowed. Still, an undercurrent of tension remained. By the time Lady Waynwood arrived, an older woman with silvering hair and a mien of weary wisdom, Robb's men had established a secure perimeter around the Bloody Gate. Supplies poured in from the Vale's lowlands, so morale was decent if not high. Waynwood heard their tale of fruitless negotiations, then laid out her own perspective. The clans have no reason to trust us. For centuries, the Vale locked them out, forced them higher into the harsh peaks. Every decade or so, we talk of deals. Then some petty lord tries to clear them out with steel. The cycle continues. Robb's jaw tightened. We want to break that cycle. It won't be easy, Waynwood said bluntly. Their leaders hold power because they promise independence and strength. For them to accept your terms, they'd need a face-saving way to do it, a strong reason why yielding now won't be seen as cowardice. Jon tapped a finger on the table. Perhaps we can orchestrate something where they're granted official guardianship of some region near the foothills, a place they can call their own. Not just farmland, but also a seat of local authority. That might be enough for them to feel they're gaining rather than losing. Waynwood considered it. A wise approach. But it still requires that the clan leaders show up to parley in earnest. Roy spread a fresh map on the table. There's one place rumored to be a center for the clan folk, a wide cavern system called the Giant's Maw, hidden in the high passes. They gather there sometimes for their rites or their feasts. If we approached with a small party, under a strong escort but not a full army, maybe they'd be forced to hear us out. Robb's eyebrows rose. Entering their seat of power is risky. We might be trapped. Jon shifted in his seat. Unless we bring Rhaegal. The clans can't trap a dragon in an open pass. If they try to corner us inside a cave, we'll remain in the outer approach, not going too deep. A small group for negotiation, but with Rhaegal overhead. That should be enough protection. Waynwood's gaze flicked between them. You're braver men than most, but it might be our best chance at forging peace. If you choose to do this, I'll come with you to add the Vale's formal voice. We should also bring 1 or 2 of your clan captives from the last skirmish. If they speak on our behalf, it might ease tensions. Thus the plan was set. Robb put together a small retinue, himself, Jon, Lady Waynwood, a dozen trusted soldiers from the north and the Vale, plus a pair of wounded clan warriors who had tentatively, if grudgingly, agreed to talk in exchange for their freedom and a promise of fair terms. They soared out on Rhaegal one crisp morning, followed at a distance by a small Vale scouting party on horseback. Giant's Maw was situated in a high bowl of jagged peaks. From above, Jon could see the dark mouths of caves pockmarking the mountainside. A few columns of smoke drifted from hidden fires. Rhaegal landed at the base of the largest opening, kicking up dust and pebbles. Robb and Jon dismounted carefully, letting Lady Waynwood and the rest approach on foot behind them. The 2 clan prisoners, both still bandaged but able to walk, shouted up toward the cavern in their rough dialect, calling for parley and naming the new visitors as potential friends. For a while, the only reply was echoing silence. Then a dozen figures emerged, angular silhouettes in fur, armed with axes and short bows. Tension crackled in the thin air. Rhaegal hissed softly, his tail scraping the ground. One-eyed Ulla stepped forward, glaring. Came to finish the job, have you? The clan prisoners said you'd speak for peace. But you arrive with that winged monster again. Robb advanced slowly, empty hands raised. We brought the dragon for our safety. We mean no harm if you do not attack. We've a proposal, terms that might benefit your people as well as the Vale. Lady Waynwood stepped beside him, cool and poised. My lord father fought in many campaigns against the clans. But I come to you with a vow that the Vale lords will cease hostilities if you agree to join us under certain conditions. You'd have official rights to certain lands, representation in matters of local governance. Ulla listened, that single eye assessing. A few of the other clansmen stood with weapons half-lowered, uncertain. One-eyed Ulla's gaze cut to the bandaged pair who'd come as mediators. They each nodded, urging him to listen. Silence stretched, broken only by the distant cry of wind through the peaks. Then a woman emerged from deeper in the shadows, the tall archer from before. She walked with a pronounced limp, courtesy of a near miss from an arrow that had grazed her thigh days earlier. The anger in her eyes had not faded, but there was a flicker of curiosity. What lands do you offer? We have no interest in your laws, your taxes. Waynwood's voice was calm as she explained, the Vale can set aside certain foothills near the western valleys. The land's not the richest, but it's arable enough for your people to grow what they need. You'd be granted formal stewardship, meaning you set your own rules there, as long as you respect the greater realm's principle of not raiding outside your borders. There'd be no forced kneeling to the Eyrie, but we'd expect that if the Vale is threatened, you come to its aid, as you did when the White Walkers threatened all of us. A murmur rose among the clans. Some looked skeptical. Others had that hungry gleam of possibility. Finally, Ulla's harsh laugh broke the tension. You'd let us keep our ways? Our clan rights? No seps forcing your seven upon us. Waynwood inclined her head. We ask only that you do not harm travelers or block trade routes. As for faith, no one will impose the seven on you if you do not trouble the seps in the Vale. That's the arrangement. You'd be part of the realm, but left to your own governance, so long as you keep the peace. The tall woman studied Jon and Robb, her mouth twisted in a frown. Why should we trust you? The Falcon Lords have always turned on us when it suited them. Robb's voice was steady. Because you've seen what we can do with the dragon. If we wanted to burn you all out of these mountains, we could have tried. But we haven't. We're here with an olive branch. If you accept, you gain stable land and a recognized right to live without fear of the Vale's knights. If you refuse, he let the words hang, not as a threat of annihilation but as a statement of reality. The cycle of raids and reprisals would continue, and eventually, the clans might suffer a far harsher fate. Ulla's nostril flared. You want a pledge from us in return? Robb nodded. An oath that you'll cease raids, that you'll not hinder roads or travelers, that if an outside enemy threatens the Vale, you won't side with them. If you break that oath, this ends. Another hush settled, thick with the weight of generations of enmity. Jon could practically see the clansmen wrestling with the idea. They had never been recognized as anything but barbaric raiders. Now they stood at the threshold of official acceptance, with minimal demands for assimilation. Some bristled at the notion of any vow to the realm. Others weighed their survival. The tall woman addressed Ulla. They spoke in lowered tones, occasionally glancing at the visitors. Finally, Ulla let out a long breath, scratching at his ragged beard. We need to speak with the other chiefs in the deeper caves. They must agree as well, or there is no deal. Robb gave a curt nod. We'll wait, but not indefinitely. Ulla waved a hand. We won't make you stand out here in the cold. There's a hollow near the entrance where we share fire sometimes. You'll be guarded, of course. Try nothing, or we'll kill you quickly. His eye darted to Rhaegal. Or die trying. So it was that Robb, Jon, Lady Waynwood, and their small retinue followed the clansmen into a cavern near the outer edge of Giant's Maw, leaving Rhaegal outside with a handful of loyal soldiers to watch over him. Flickering torchlight revealed ancient stone walls carved by water over millennia. The air was cold, but still, the ground littered with old straw pallets. Guards kept wary eyes on the newcomers, but no one attacked. In the distance, deeper into the labyrinth, voices reverberated as Ulla and the other leaders presumably gathered to debate. Jon and Robb exchanged glances, each reading the tension in the other's eyes. One wrong move, one suspicion, and the clans could turn on them. Even a single arrow loosed at the right time could end it all. But the alternative, continuing a cycle of violence, was hardly more appealing. This was the best chance to bring the Vale's mountains into a broader peace. They waited for what felt like hours, listening to the drip of water along the rocky walls, the murmur of distant clan debate. Waynwood sat on a low stone outcropping, arms folded in patient resignation. The northern soldiers remained close, hands near swords. Every so often, one of the clan guards would peer at the visitors with open curiosity, as if stunned that they had come this far for words rather than slaughter. At length, Ulla and the tall woman returned, accompanied by several other figures, older chiefs, younger warriors, all grim. Ulla spoke in a gravelly tone. We have talked. Some want to continue fighting, believing your offer's a trick. Others see a chance to settle. We are divided. Jon's gut sank at that admission. If they were divided, the risk of conflict remained. But Ulla continued, we will propose a trial. A test of your honesty. If you pass, we will accept your terms. Robb's eyes narrowed. What sort of test? The tall woman crossed her arms. Our ways are older than your Kneeler customs. We have a ritual for forging alliance, an oath sealed by blood. If you undertake it, you pledge that you speak true, and if you break that pledge, your blood is forfeit. Likewise, if we break our vow to keep the peace, we are forfeit. So says the Mountain Pact. Waynwood lifted an eyebrow. Blood magic, she asked warily. The Vale's folk knew better than most to mistrust occult rites after the troubles that had plagued the Seven Kingdoms. Ulla barked a dismissive laugh. No magic, just ritual. A cut on the hand, a piece of flesh burned in the flame, a shared drink from a horn. It's how we vow ourselves to each other. So if you want our trust, you'll do it our way. Robb's expression was measured. He looked to Jon, who recalled vaguely that the free folk beyond the wall had their own ways of sealing pacts in blood. This sounded not dissimilar, an ancient custom to ensure honesty reliant on the fear of breaking an oath once physically sealed. After a moment, Robb nodded. Very well. But let us be clear, this vow goes both ways. If we do this, the clans will abide by the agreement. No more raids, no more kidnapping travelers. The tall woman inclined her head in agreement. So be it. Prepare yourselves. We do this at sunrise in the great hall of the Maw. They withdrew deeper, leaving the visitors in uneasy silence. Lady Waynwood exhaled. A barbaric method, but if it binds them in their eyes, it's not so different from any oath. We often cut ourselves from glass to vow a marriage pact. I suppose we can endure a little blood and fire. Jon's mind swirled with caution. A public ritual in the heart of the clan domain? The risk was enormous. Yet it might be the only path to real peace. He turned to Robb. We can do this. But we must stay alert. Robb agreed. I'll keep a few men at my side. You and I will be the ones to swear. Waynwood can represent the Vale. That's all we need. The rest must be ready in case something goes wrong. If we come out of this with an alliance, the Vale is one step closer to true stability. They tried to sleep that night in the cold nook of the cavern, taking turns standing watch. Jon's thoughts roamed to the past, how easily savage conflict had overtaken Westeros, how a single betrayal could unravel months or years of hope. But he also remembered that once the free folk had allied with the crows of the Night's Watch to fight the White Walkers despite centuries of enmity. If it could happen then, perhaps it could happen now. When dawn's first light reached the high peaks, a clan herald came to summon them. The great hall of the Maw, it turned out, was a vast chamber carved by subterranean water, lit by a ring of torches and a wide shaft of sunlight that trickled through a fissure in the rock above. The ground was uneven stone, smoothed in places where the clan folk had gathered for generations. At the center lay a raised slab of rock serving as a makeshift altar or dais. Around it, dozens of clan warriors stood in a circle, armed but not openly hostile. Ulla and the tall woman waited near the slab, accompanied by several elders. Robb, Jon, and Lady Waynwood approached. Behind them came half a dozen men-at-arms from the Vale and the north, albeit unhelmed, to show minimal aggression. Rhaegal, of course, remained outside, though the clan folk surely knew the dragon was near. The air smelled of damp stone, smoke, and the faint tang of old blood. Jon's neck prickled. He felt as though he were in some primeval temple. Ulla spoke in a booming voice that echoed off the cavern walls. We gather for the Mountain Pact. Newcomers come to vow peace. We test their words with blood. If they keep faith, we share lands and safety. If they break it, curses on their heads. Let the old ways witness. The tall woman produced a rough knife, stone-hilted and jagged. She held it aloft. Who swears the vow? Robb stepped forward. I swear on behalf of the North and the alliances we've built. I vow to honor the terms, to grant you lands in the foothills, to end all forced clearing of your people from the high passes, to allow trade with the Vale. In exchange, you vow to cease raiding, to stand if needed with the Vale's defense. We all vow no harm to each other unless the pact is broken. This is the word of Robb Stark. Waynwood cleared her throat, stepping beside him. I, Lady Waynwood, speak for the Vale in place of Lord Aaron, who is but a child. We vow the same. You shall have a voice in local governance. We shall not make war upon you unless you first break faith. This is my word. Ulla handed Robb the knife. Robb didn't flinch. He lifted his left hand, pressed the blade against his palm, and drew a quick line. Blood welled, dripping onto the stone. Then he passed the knife to Waynwood, who did likewise, grimacing slightly. Finally, Jon took the blade, feeling all eyes on him, particularly the suspicious stares of clan warriors who likely recognized him as Targaryen-blooded. He sliced his palm, letting a small rivulet of blood flow, binding himself to the vow as well. Ulla accepted the knife back. He cut his own palm, as did the tall woman and several other clan elders. Then, in a gesture that reminded Jon of old wildling ceremonies, they let their blood pool together in a shallow depression on the altar stone. An old man with a string of bones around his neck approached, carrying a horn and a bowl. He murmured words in a dialect Jon could barely catch. Then he scooped some of the pooled blood into the bowl, poured a dark liquid, wine or fermented goat's milk, over it and heated it briefly with a torch flame so the mixture hissed and steamed. One by one, Ulla, the tall woman, Robb, Waynwood, and Jon each took a mouthful of the mixture from the horn that the old man held. It tasted bitter, metallic, and smoky, but Jon forced it down, heart pounding with the gravity of this moment. When it was done, Ulla raised his bloodied hand. The vow is sealed. The clan warriors around them let out a haunting chant, a rumble that reverberated through the cavern like thunder. Jon realized his hands were shaking, partly from adrenaline, partly from the raw intensity of this ancient rite. Robb's voice rose above the chanting, clear and resolute. Then we have an accord. We will return with the documents granting you your lands in the foothills. You will patrol your borders and prevent further raids. Let this be the start of a true peace between the Vale and the mountain clans. My word on it. A chorus of voices echoed. Not every face was friendly, but there was a definite shift. The official oath, sealed in blood, meant something in the eyes of these people. Whether they adhered to it in the long run remained to be seen, but in this moment they had chosen to accept the offer over endless war. After the ritual concluded, the clan elders allowed Robb's party to leave the hall unmolested. Ulla and a small contingent accompanied them to the cavern mouth where Rhaegal still waited. Jon guessed it was partly to ensure they left without further intrusion. But Ulla didn't sneer as he had before. A grudging respect flickered in his single eye. We'll await your word, Ulla said, pressing a crude bandage over his sliced palm. See that you keep your vow, or we'll return to the old ways. Robb inclined his head. We'll keep it. Then he mounted Rhaegal with Jon, while Lady Waynwood and the men-at-arms prepared to ride down to the Bloody Gate. Rhaegal spread his wings, launching skyward. A swirl of dust and pebbles swept outward, causing some of the clansmen to raise arms over their faces. But none fired arrows. As they soared higher, Jon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Their mission, though fraught, was a success for now. They spent another week ensuring the agreement took root. Waynwood and Royce drafted official charters. Robb delegated a small Vale Oversight Council to manage the transition, ensuring the clan presence in the foothills wouldn't clash with existing villages. It was a delicate arrangement, too delicate to be called a permanent solution, but it was a step forward, better than the cycle of blood. Word reached the Eyrie that the king in the north had forged a new kind of treaty in the mountains. Many Vale lords were skeptical. Some outright scoffed that the clans would break faith at the first sign of advantage. Yet no new raids came in those days. And so, with cautious hope, Robb turned his army back north, leaving a token Vale garrison to protect the gate. Rhaegal carried them swiftly over ravines and ridges, overshadowing any would-be ambushers. At the parting, Lady Waynwood thanked them. You have my gratitude, your grace, Lord Jon. Though we differ in many ways, we share a realm, and it seems you truly mean to unite it. Jon could see how tired Robb was, but he gave a polite smile. We do what we can. Farewell, my lady. The march home was far more pleasant than the journey in. Winter was closing in, but the crisp autumn air felt invigorating. Soldiers chatted among themselves about the uncanny ritual they had witnessed, the raw closeness to danger in those mountain caves. Some boasted they'd never flinched, though Jon had seen their knuckles whiten on sword hilts. Still, morale was good. Many recognized that they had helped avert a prolonged and bloody conflict. That sense of purpose gave them pride. When at last they reached the borders of the Riverlands, the men from the Vale parted ways, heading east. Robb led the northern contingent back along the King's Road. Days later, they passed Moat Cailin, where the garrison welcomed them with cheers, another small sign of growing stability in the neck. Finally, they entered the familiar expanse of rolling hills and pine forests that heralded Winterfell's domain. The nights grew colder, frost edging the grasses at dawn. And then, one crisp morning, the dark silhouettes of Winterfell's towers rose from the horizon, warm lamplight glowing in the windows. Home. The people of Winterfell turned out to greet them at the gates, stable hands, stewards, small folk who had come to respect Robb's leadership. Rhaegal descended into the courtyard, stirring the old banners. Robb and Jon dismounted to scattered applause. It was not the raucous cheering of a victory parade, but the heartfelt welcome of people relieved to have their lord and his brother returned safe. Jon felt a pang of warmth in his chest. This truly was home now, a place he was accepted not as an outsider but as part of the Stark legacy. They'd hardly removed their riding leathers when several counselors approached with pressing matters, letters from Gendry Baratheon about a potential marriage alliance, requests from the west for a renewed trade route across the neck, rumors of unrest near the ruined Lannister strongholds. Robb listened wearily, then declared he would address it all on the morrow. For now he wanted rest. Jon followed Robb to the Great Keep. On their way, they stopped by the enclosure to see that Rhaegal was properly tended. The dragon, too, seemed tired from the journey, quickly settling to doze. A stable hand approached timidly, offering a freshly slain sheep. Jon gave an approving nod, and Rhaegal's eyes slit open, tongue flicking at the scent of blood. Soon, the courtyard echoed with the crunch of bones as the dragon fed. At last, Robb and Jon retreated to the solar. A fire crackled in the hearth, driving away the chill. Servants brought them warm water to wash up, along with bread and ale. Robb sank into a chair with a heavy sigh. Gods, I've forgotten how fine it is just to sit in one's own seat. Jon managed a small grin, easing into a seat across from him. We accomplished what we set out to do, more or less. That's more than most rulers can say after a campaign in the mountains. Robb nodded, brushing his damp hair aside. We'll see if the clans keep their vows. Still, it's a chance. And that's all we can give them. They fell silent for a time, listening to the crackle of flames. Jon poured them each a cup of ale, passing one to Robb. The king in the north took a sip, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. There's always something else, Robb said at length, a faint, humorless chuckle escaping. Once we finalize the Vales Treaty, we'll have to respond to Gendry's letter about a marriage. Then the matter of the Westerlands, some scattered Lannister cousins might cause trouble. And you know the Iron Islands are always teetering on rebellion. Jon stared into his drink. It never ends, does it? But this is what a realm truly is: constant work, like forging steel in a smithy, shaping it blow by blow. Robb's eyes flickered with a weary fondness. Father never made it look this hard. Or if he did, we were too young to notice. Jon pictured Ned Stark's solemn face, the quiet stoicism that concealed 1,000 cares. He shouldered a lot quietly. But he also had the advantage of peace, relatively speaking, under Robert's reign. We're rebuilding from chaos. Perhaps one day, if we do our jobs well, the next generation can enjoy simpler times. Robb's gaze trailed toward the window where twilight deepened. I hope so. He sat up straighter. Speaking of which, how do you feel about Gendry's suggestion? He hinted he might propose a match with one of the Stark girls. But Arya is gone, Sansa's in the airy forging alliances of her own, and you know how she's grown wary of marriage after all that happened. Maybe a distant cousin or a Manderly, though that wouldn't be a Stark tie. Jon shrugged. It might still serve to strengthen ties. Gendry wants recognition to solidify his line as Baratheon properly. I recall Lady Alice Mormont is of marrying age, though she's quite fierce. Or perhaps a Karstark. Hard to say without speaking to them. Robb rubbed his temples. We can handle that in a formal negotiation. The main point is Gendry's looking to anchor his seat through marriage, so we'll find him a suitable partner. Preferably one who doesn't mind the storms of the Stormlands. He mustered a faint smile, then stood. Let's get some sleep, Jon. Tomorrow we'll face the next wave of tasks. Jon rose, fatigue tugging at his limbs. Aye. Good night, Robb. He made his way to his chamber, stripped off dusty clothes, and washed. As he slid under the blankets, images of the mountains flickered in his mind, the raw stone halls, the taste of blood on the altar, Rhaegal's roar echoing off the ridges. But above it all, he felt the steady drumbeat of hope. They had taken one more step toward uniting a fractured land, forging a realm not through terror but through cautious trust. Whether it would endure was a question for tomorrow and the days beyond. For now, he closed his eyes and let the darkness envelop him, lulled by the faint howling of the northern wind outside the window. Morning arrived cold, with a thin layer of frost on the courtyard's stone. Jon woke early, out of old habit, and found his way to the Godwood, seeking a moment of solitude before the day's demands. The ancient weirwood stood silent, red leaves drifting in the still air. He knelt by the pool, gazing at the reflected sky, the pale dawn clouds. Memories washed over him. Nights on the wall, the face of Ygritte, the haunting eyes of the Night King, and Daenerys Targaryen's final tear-streaked face among the rubble of King's Landing. Each recollection carried its weight of sorrow and gratitude. He had survived. Many had not. Now he lived in a realm forging its new shape, a realm that might yet find wholeness. He whispered a half-formed prayer to the old gods, asking them for guidance, for strength. The wind stirred the branches, rustling them in a faint whisper. He felt no answers in words, only a quiet resolve blossoming in his chest. Rising, he returned to the castle with a measured pace, bracing himself for the tasks that lay ahead. In the great hall, Robb was already seated, reading the letters that had arrived by Raven. Lord Glover stood beside him, arms folded. A cluster of courtiers milled nearby, awaiting directions. Jon slipped to Robb's side, scanning the thick pile of parchment. Robb glanced at him, tapping one scroll. This is from Gendry. He requests an official meeting in Storm's End. He wants me or a high-ranking Stark to come and discuss alliances, marriages, trade. It's quite direct. Jon nodded thoughtfully. If we are to maintain unity among the lords, we can't ignore it. But it's a long ride to Storm's End. Longer still if we consider the possibility of traveling by ship. With winter nearing, the seas might be rough. Robb grunted. True. Another letter from the Westerlands, Lord Lefford, who's trying to gather the pieces of what was once House Lannister's domain, asks for an audience. Claims bandits plague the Gold Roads. He wants help. Then there's a message from Dorne about finalizing open trade routes. And also the Iron Islands, some new captain who claims partial rule near Pike. They're all reaching out, trying to secure their positions. Jon scanned the faces of the northern lords who had gathered. The realm is truly looking to the north for leadership. It's a burden, but also an opportunity. We should carefully prioritize. Storm's End might be crucial because Gendry's seat is stable and could serve as a southern anchor. The Westerlands, though battered, is also important for overall trade and gold flow. Dorne's far but valuable. The Iron Islands, we can't ignore them, but they might require a specific approach. They've always coveted independence. Robb leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. We'll need more than me flying around on Rhaegal. The realm is too vast and each region needs attention. Perhaps we can send delegations. Let Lord Manderley or Lady Barbary Dustin handle some negotiations while we handle the major ones. Divide our focus but remain consistent. Lord Glover stepped forward. Your Grace, I'd be willing to lead an envoy to the Westerlands if you see fit. My line once had dealings with Lannisport merchants well before the war. I can speak civilly on trade. Robb nodded, genuinely appreciative. That would help. Glover to the Westerlands, accompanied by some men who can protect you on the roads. We'll need to choose someone for the Iron Islands. Perhaps Lord Wyman Manderley himself or one of his kin. They have some naval experience. As for Storm's End, I might go myself. Or Jon, you could go. Gendry respects you, I believe. Jon paused, considering that possibility. He had known Gendry at the Wall and later through their shared fight against the dead. They had parted on somewhat friendly terms. I don't mind going, but do you think it better for you to show your presence? Reaffirming the unity. Robb drummed his fingers on the armrest of the chair, the battered direwolf carving at his shoulder. Storm's End is a strategic seat. If Gendry wants a marriage alliance, maybe the king in the north should handle it personally. On the other hand, if something urgent arises here, it'd be best if I remained close to Winterfell. They spoke a while, weighing the benefits. In the end, they decided. Jon would lead the delegation to Storm's End, accompanied by a small retinue of northern knights, including Ser Lyman Serwyn. They would ride south, meet with Gendry, discuss any prospective match. Robb would remain in the north to finalize the Vale's new arrangement and monitor the realm from a central position. Glover, for his part, would soon depart for the Westerlands with a handful of men. Dorne could wait a little longer, or they might send a raven to arrange a separate meeting place later. Within the week, the plan was set in motion. Jon prepared for the journey, gathering a small escort of about 20 riders. Serwyn, 2 other knights from House Mormont, a few of Jon's personal guards, and a maester's assistant for recording treaties. They packed winter gear, though the southern roads should be milder. Jon took one last walk around Winterfell's walls the night before departure. Snow had not yet fallen heavily, but the promise of it lay in the air. The howling wind from the north carried a faint, distant chill that reminded him winter was indeed coming. He found Robb in the courtyard, standing near Rhaegal's enclosure. The dragon dozed in the corner, half-lidded eyes reflecting torchlight. Robb turned at Jon's approach. I was just thinking if we should fly you part of the way, but that might give the wrong impression. Arriving on a dragon might overshadow Gendry. He might think you're coming to dominate. Jon chuckled softly. Yes, let's keep it simpler. I'll ride with the men. If necessary, Rhaegal can come later. Or you can come on Rhaegal if trouble arises. Robb nodded, pulling his cloak tight against the wind. Safe travels, Jon. Keep me informed. If Gendry proves difficult, though I doubt he will, remind him we're all forging this realm together. And if talk of marriage arises, don't promise anything we can't fulfill. We have to consult families, arrange dowries. Gods. I never realized how complicated all this was before we were in the thick of it. Jon clapped Robb on the shoulder. "I'll remember. You take care of the north. Hopefully, by the time I'm back, we'll have more than half the realm moving in a good direction. The other half might still be pining for chaos." A faint grin curved Robb's mouth. "We'll handle them one at a time." At dawn, Jon and his party departed Winterfell's gates. The journey south felt reminiscent of his earlier travels, though with far less dread. Villages along the way seemed grateful to see a Stark-led contingent, acknowledging the new era of relative peace. They navigated the Neck, again passing the partially restored Moat Cailin, where the garrison offered them fresh supplies. From there, they crossed into the Riverlands, the wide streams flowing calmer than in war-torn days. Jon found himself reflecting on how much had changed, how once he rode south from Winterfell in near anonymity, yet now he carried a name and reputation. Whispers followed him. The Targaryen who gave a dragon to the king in the north, people would say. The bastard who turned out to be royal blood. He tried to ignore the stares, focusing instead on the mission at hand. Storm's End loomed in his thoughts, a fortress famed for its thick walls and battered by relentless storms. Gendry Baratheon was likely eager to prove himself as more than just Robert's bastard. Perhaps forging an alliance with House Stark was the surest path to legitimacy in the eyes of lords still uncertain about him. Crossing from the Riverlands into the Crownlands, Jon passed the charred remains of towns that had never fully recovered from Daenerys's final campaign. Though time and rebuilding efforts had softened the scars, some blackened ruins still stood as silent memorials. He felt a pang of guilt, memory stirring of her unstoppable dragons overhead. Rhaegal, too, had soared there once, though not as fiercely as Drogon had. Now Rhaegal served a different purpose. Jon prayed that such devastation would never be repeated. They skirted around King's Landing. The city was still in a state of partial ruin, though a new council of local lords and merchants was gradually restoring order. Some had looked to Jon for leadership, but he wanted no seat on the Iron Throne, nor did Robb. For the time being, the city operated as a free city-state of sorts, loosely aligned with the realm's new confederation. Davos Seaworth was said to be a guiding hand there, though he mostly served as an advisor to whomever stepped forward. Jon decided not to linger. He had no desire to revisit the heartbreak in those streets. Continuing south, the road grew more rugged. The winds carried a salty tang as they approached the coast. Finally, atop a windswept cliff, they beheld Storm's End rising from the rocky shoreline, its colossal curtain walls and drum towers looming against a slate-gray sky. The sea crashed below, white foam spraying the dark stones. Jon recalled hearing stories of how it was built by Durin Godsgrief in the Age of Heroes. Magic said to have shaped those stones to withstand the fiercest storms. Even from afar, he could sense the fortress's unyielding grandeur. They rode toward the main gate, flags of the crowned stag fluttering in the gale. Guards challenged them, but upon learning of Jon's identity and purpose, they were ushered into the courtyard. The swirling wind tore at cloaks, flung droplets of sea spray across the stones. Yet the fortress felt alive, with stable hands darting about, a blacksmith hammering near the anvil, and a small crowd of onlookers gathering to see the northern visitors. Gendry Baratheon emerged from a keep doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his black hair tousled by the wind. He wore simple yet sturdy attire, a leather jerkin embossed with the stag sigil, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man well-versed in physical labor. A small retinue of Stormlander knights flanked him. At the sight of Jon, Gendry's face lit up in a grin. "Jon Snow, or Targaryen? It's good to see you either way." Jon dismounted, returning a genuine smile. "Just Jon will do. Gendry, Lord Baratheon now, it seems. Storm's End suits you." Gendry shrugged, casting an almost bashful glance at the towering battlements. "I'm still getting used to it. Every time a storm blows in, I think the walls will crumble. But they never do." He extended an arm in greeting. Jon clasped it, recalling how once they had both been outcasts of a sort. Gendry the smith's apprentice, Jon the bastard. So much had changed. "Thank you for hosting us," Jon said, introducing Serwyn and the other knights. Gendry nodded warmly, welcoming them into the keep. The interior, though drafty, was well kept. Tapestries depicting stags in gold and black lined the corridors, and braziers fought against the coastal chill. They soon arrived in a large hall, simpler than Winterfell's but sturdy in design. Servants brought hot mulled wine, and trays of bread with salt. After pleasantries, Gendry led Jon to a more private solar, where they sat near a roaring fire. The wind howled outside, rattling shutters. Gendry reclined in a heavy wooden chair, wearing a relaxed, open expression. "I've heard quite the tales of you and Robb Stark, uniting Westeros under a council, forging alliances with a dragon. I see you didn't bring the dragon here today." Jon sipped his mulled wine, tasting spices and honey. "I thought it best not to arrive as if in conquest. We come in peace, hoping to build on the unity we found fighting the White Walkers." Gendry nodded, a faint sadness passing over his face at the mention of that war. "I've not forgotten the winter, and I remember how you once risked your life to bring proof to the Queen about the undead." He paused, choosing words carefully. "King's Landing changed everything. I won't pretend it didn't, but what you and Robb have built since, it gives me hope. That's why I wrote to you. Storm's End stands, but I want it to be more than an isolated seat. I want to be part of a realm that won't tear itself apart again." Jon inclined his head. "That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. You mentioned a possible marriage alliance. Robb sent me to learn more." Gendry scratched at his chin, looking slightly embarrassed. I'm a bastard turned lord, not exactly brimming with highborn relatives. But if House Baratheon is to endure, I need heirs, a wife from a respected house. I thought, who better than one tied to the Starks? There's no question of your house's honor, and it'd bind our kingdoms closer." Jon reflected on the suggestion. "We have Sansa, though she's currently in the Eyrie dealing with her own alliances, and I'm not sure she's keen on marrying again. Arya's gone traveling. No one knows if she'll ever settle. Robb has no daughters. There are distant Stark cousins, or we might consider the Manderleys, the Glovers, or the Umbers all-powerful northern houses. Their daughters might be open to a match with the new Lord Baratheon." Gendry frowned slightly. "I was hoping for a direct Stark tie to strengthen the symbolic link. But maybe that's not feasible. I also considered if you had an unmarried sister, but..." His voice trailed off awkwardly, mindful that Jon was only half-sibling to them, and that they were effectively scattered. Jon managed a small, rueful smile. "My sisters have their own paths. For a strong match, we can still find a cousin of House Stark. Or, if you'd consider it, a daughter of House Mormont, Alice, perhaps. She's bold and from a distinguished line. Maybe not as large or wealthy as the Manderleys, but they have a proud legacy. Or Lady Barbary Dustin has younger relations who might be suitable, though that house's ties to the Starks can be complicated." Gendry sighed in a mix of amusement and resignation. "I suppose we can meet them, see if any are amenable. I don't want a marriage that's purely political. But I know the realm needs these bonds. I've come to accept that." They talked more about the details. Dowries, lands, the potential for Storm's End to send troops if the North was threatened, and vice versa. Storm's End could also supply certain southern goods that the North lacked, creating mutual prosperity. Gendry perked up at the notion of forging new trade routes. "You know, I was a smith. My forges here could produce weapons, armor. The North might want to import them, especially as you rebuild your forces. We get timber and furs from you in return." Jon recognized that Gendry's skill as a smith had never faded. With Storm's End under his command, he could assemble some of the finest smiths in Westeros. "That could be valuable. Let's draw up an outline. I'll send word to Robb, see which families in the North might be open to this. No guarantees, but it's a strong start." That evening, Gendry hosted a modest feast in Jon's honor. The castle hall rumbled with laughter and conversation, though the underlying note was more subdued than a traditional royal feast might have been. The storms battered the walls outside, occasionally rattling shutters and making the torches flicker. Jon ate heartily, fresh fish from the bay, crusty bread, and the tang of spiced wine. He caught glimpses of Gendry's counselors, men and women who had served Stannis Baratheon or who had once been sworn to Renly. They seemed uncertain, measuring Jon's every word. But overall, the mood was welcoming. An alliance with the North was an exciting prospect for a newly legitimated Baratheon lord. In private moments, Jon and Gendry reminisced about their earlier days, journeys with the Brotherhood without banners, that fateful trek beyond the Wall, the heartbreak in King's Landing. It felt surreal to be discussing those memories in a warm hall where they dined as High Lords. Yet such was the tide of fate. They parted that night on friendly terms, promising to finalize a draft treaty within days. Jon spent a week at Storm's End, enough time to cement the initial agreements. He wrote multiple letters to Winterfell, detailing the main points. Gendry offered to station some Stormlander knights in the north as a gesture of goodwill, to train side by side with northern troops. In return, the North would share knowledge of harsh winter survival, trade routes, marriage prospects, a pledge of mutual defense. Once formalized, it could be as solid as Storm's End's walls. When the final scrolls were signed by Gendry and countersigned by Jon, sealed in Baratheon black and gold wax, Jon felt a surge of accomplishment. Another brick in the foundation of the new Westeros. With goodbyes said, Jon and his retinue mounted up to return north. Gendry walked them to the gates, the wind tugging at his cloak. "Safe journey, Jon, and let me know if your king in the north has time to visit. I'd welcome him here." Jon smiled. "I will. Thank you for your hospitality." They rode out under gray skies. The storm seemed to have calmed a bit, but the roads were muddy, slowing their progress. Still, morale was high. Serwyn mentioned how different it felt from the old days, traveling peacefully from the north to the storm lands without fear of ambush by Lannisters or Boltons or any other foe. Indeed, the realm had come a long way. A fortnight later, they neared the Crownlands again. Jon briefly considered stopping by King's Landing, perhaps to see Davos. But a messenger intercepted them on the road, bearing urgent tidings. A revolt has broken out in the Westerlands. Lord Glover's party is pinned down near Ash Mark. The bandits are more numerous than expected, and they seem well-armed. Jon's stomach sank. "What do you mean by well-armed?" he demanded. The messenger, a young man with a battered cloak, wiped sweat from his brow. "Steel, crossbows, possibly stolen from old Lannister caches. They attacked Glover's men, forcing them back. He sent a raven to Winterfell, but your presence might help. The king in the north is preparing to fly out on the dragon. He told me to find you in case you could assist." Jon shot a glance at Serwyn. Storm's End was behind them now, and though they had no immediate means to muster an army, they could at least hurry west. "We'll ride hard." "Where's Robb heading?" "West as well, I believe. Likely to Ash Mark. They say the bandits are led by some ex-Lannister officer who refuses the new order." The messenger shrugged. "Details are thin, my lord. But it sounds serious." Jon felt a surge of concern. Lord Glover was no fool, but if these bandits had substantial numbers or cunning leadership, he might be in real danger. And the fledgling stability in the Westerlands could unravel if Robb was forced into a prolonged campaign. They couldn't afford to let a revolt fester. "We leave at once," Jon said. "Double pace if our horses can bear it." They pushed on, cutting northwest across the Crownlands into the Westerlands. The landscape shifted from rolling plains to rock-studded hills. The specter of the once mighty House Lannister hung over everything: destroyed keeps, abandoned roads, mines that had collapsed or been sealed. Clearly, the region was still in disarray. Eventually, they encountered a patrol of Stark men near an old watchtower from whom they learned more. The bandits called themselves the Lion's Wrath, led by a man named Ser Tybolt Hawthorne, a former Lannister bannerman. He had rallied disillusioned soldiers, sellswords, and peasants resentful of the realm's shift in power. Glover's small embassy had tried to negotiate, but the bandits demanded the restoration of a Lannister ruler in Casterly Rock. When Glover refused, the bandits attacked. Robb was reportedly en route with a larger northern host and Rhaegal. But Hawthorne's forces were mobile, raiding villages, capturing storehouses of food and weaponry. If left unchecked, they could become a real threat, maybe even reawaken dormant loyalties to the Lannisters. The region was frail enough that a charismatic warlord might gather thousands under a forgotten lion banner. Jon led his men forward, determined to find Glover's party or Robb's host. Through dusty roads and battered hamlets, they followed rumors of skirmishes. At last, near a place called Red Run, a shallow river winding through rocky outcrops, they spotted smoke rising. Jon's party approached cautiously, discovering a scene of recent battle, tents slashed, bodies scattered, among them some bearing the sigil of House Glover. A group of battered survivors huddled behind an overturned wagon. Jon rushed to them, dismounting. "What happened?" he asked, scanning their wounded. A man with a Glover surcoat coughed, pressing a cloth to a bloody arm. "We were hit at dawn. Ser Tybolt's men fired crossbows, then charged. We lost half our number. The Lord was taken, Lord Glover's a prisoner." Jon's gut twisted. "Where did they take him?" The man shook his head helplessly. "West, I think, deeper into the hills toward Ashmark. We tried to hold them off, but they knew the terrain too well." Serwyn cursed under his breath. Jon immediately turned to their own group. "We have to move. We'll chase them or at least track them. If Glover is still alive, we can't let them slip away." They set off at once, following tracks of hoofprints and wagon ruts. Some were faint and older, but there were enough fresh prints to guide them. By midday, they reached a craggy ravine where a handful of bandit scouts fired arrows at them from higher ground. Jon's men took cover behind boulders, returning fire. After a tense exchange, the scouts fled deeper into the ravine, presumably warning the main force. Jon realized they risked walking into a trap if they pursued blindly. He conferred with Serwyn. "We can't wait for Robb to catch up, not if Glover's in mortal danger. But we need to be smart. Let's send a flank around that ridge, see if we can catch them off guard." Serwyn agreed. They split their company, half going around the ravine's perimeter while Jon led the rest forward cautiously. Time weighed on Jon's mind. If the bandits realized a small force was coming for them, they might decide to kill Glover or retreat too far to find. At the same time, racing in unprepared could be suicidal. They advanced, swords drawn, hearts pounding in the quiet gloom of the ravine. An occasional arrow word passed, but few found their mark. Then, with a shout, a group of about 20 bandits rushed them from a side path, brandishing spears and axes. Jon's men braced, steel clashing in a violent cacophony. Jon parried a spear thrust, pivoting to slash with Longclaw. The Valyrian steel sheared through the spear shaft, then bit into the bandit's torso. Another raider lunged at Jon from behind, but Serwyn tackled the man before he could land a blow. A swirl of dust and blood. For a moment, Jon's senses sharpened to the edge of a blade footing on uneven rocks, the stench of sweat and fear, the crash of metal on metal. He pushed forward, calling for his men to stay together. The bandits fought fiercely, fueled by desperation or blind loyalty to their cause. But they lacked the discipline of trained knights. Jon's group began to gain the upper hand. Suddenly, a horn blast echoed, rolling through the ravine. Jon froze, uncertain if it heralded more bandits. Then a roar, low, resonant, unmistakable, rippled across the air. Rhaegal. Relief flooded Jon. Robb had arrived. Overhead, the green dragon swooped into view, backlit against the sun. The bandits panicked, scattering for cover. Moments later, northern cavalry poured in from the ravine's far side, led by Robb Stark himself, his wolf's head helm glinting in the harsh light. He raised his sword, rallying his men. Within minutes, the bandits found themselves under assault from two directions, Jon's company on one side, Robb's larger force on the other, and a dragon above. Their lines collapsed. Many threw down weapons, others tried to flee. The men who refused to yield were cut down or trampled. Jon wiped sweat from his brow, catching his breath. He signaled a cease to the fighting once the bandits had been subdued or killed. Robb guided Rhaegal to land on a ledge near the ravine, then dismounted, breathing hard. "Jon, I was worried I'd be too late." Jon clasped Robb's arm. "You arrived just in time. Glover was taken. We have to find him." Robb nodded curtly. "We captured a few bandits alive. Let's make them talk." They did so, rounding up a handful of terrified men who huddled near a rock outcrop. One had a crossbow slung over his shoulder. Another wore battered Lannister armor. Under Robb's steely gaze and the looming presence of Rhaegal, who growled softly, they confessed that Ser Tybolt had taken Glover deeper into the hills, probably to an old Lannister stronghold near Ashmark. Robb wasted no time. Leaving a portion of his men to secure the ravine and treat the wounded, he led Jon and a swift cavalry detachment west. Dusk found them at the outskirts of Ashmark, once the seat of House Marbrand, allied to the Lannisters. The castle, though partially ruined in the wars, still had formidable walls. Smoke curled from within, indicating occupation. Scouts reported that Tybolt's men were inside. Robb dismounted, scanning the defenses with narrowed eyes. They've had time to prepare. Any direct assault might cost lives. But we can't leave Glover in their hands. Jon approached him. Rhaegal could breach the walls. But a full burn might kill Glover if he's inside. And we don't want to destroy the castle if we can avoid it. Robb grimaced. We could attempt to feint. Draw them out. If Tybalt thinks we're about to firebomb them, he might negotiate. Jon glanced at the sky where twilight streaked the horizon. Ser Tybalt might be fanatical. He might even prefer martyrdom to surrender. Let's try a parley, see if we can exchange terms. Perhaps we can free Glover without storming the castle. Robb agreed. They advanced under a white flag just within bowshot of Ashemark's gate. A figure soon appeared on the battlements, torchlight revealing a pale face and bright, manic eyes. Ser Tybalt Hawthorne, a minor noble turned warlord. He called down, "Stark Dog. You come with your dragon to finish House Lannister's legacy? We won't kneel." Robb kept his composure. "Release Lord Glover. This rebellion gains you nothing. The Lannisters are gone. The realm is rebuilding." Tybalt spat over the wall. "Gone? Their name lives in our hearts. Westeros should be ruled by those of lion's blood, not wolves or dragons. A plague on your alliance." Jon felt a flicker of pity for this man clinging to the memory of a once proud house. "Listen to reason," Jon called. "The Lannisters themselves brought ruin to these lands. Why uphold that old tyranny? You see how the people suffer. Look at your region, ravaged by war." Ser Tybalt let out a barking laugh. "Don't lecture me, Targaryen bastard. You stand with the usurpers of the north. We have Glover, and if you try to take him, I'll cut his throat and feed the crows. Now be gone, or test your flame." Robb's voice hardened. "We will not leave without him. If you force a siege, we'll do what must be done. You cannot hold out long." Tybalt sneered. "Don't be so sure. We've stockpiled supplies. We'll see if your dragon can stand a volley of scorpion bolts. Ashmark had them once, left over from the war. We found them." He chuckled darkly. "Think on that." Robb exchanged a worried glance with Jon. Scorpions, the large anti-dragon ballistae, were no idle threat. One well-aimed shot could bring Rhaegal down. Jon's heart pounded. They could still try a night assault on foot, but that risked Glover's life. Meanwhile, Tybalt seemed deranged enough to kill Glover at a whim. Night fell over the standoff. Robb pulled back to make camp out of bowshot. Scouts circled, verifying there were indeed old scorpion mounts on the castle's ramparts. The defenders had torches posted, watchful. Robb paced by the fire, scowling. We can't let them hold Glover hostage indefinitely. But rushing the walls might get him killed. Jon thought of their experiences in the Vale. We might stage a distraction or infiltration, send a small team over the walls, rescue Glover quietly, then open the gates from within. Robb considered it. That could work if we can scale the walls undetected, possibly under cover of darkness. But it's a risk. Those scorpions will be manned and they'll have watchers for infiltration. Jon took a measured breath. "Let me lead a small group. I've climbed the wall. Ashemark's ramparts can't be higher than that." Robb eyed him with a mix of admiration and concern. "That was a long time ago. But I won't stop you. You've the best chance at success. We'll create a diversion out front, maybe have Rhaegal roar and hover at a distance enough to keep them manning the scorpions on the walls. While they're distracted, you slip over a lesser defended section. If you free Glover, we can open the gates or see if Tybalt yields." They refined the plan swiftly. Under the cover of night, Robb's main force would approach from the south, making noise, while Rhaegal passed overhead but kept out of the scorpions' effective range. Meanwhile, Jon, Serwyn, and a handful of picked men would circle north, carrying grappling hooks and rope. The moment the defenders' attention was drawn to Rhaegal, Jon's group would scale the walls. It wasn't guaranteed, but it might be their best hope. Just before midnight, they moved into position. The wind carried faint howls from distant hills. Clouds drifted across the moon, offering darkness. From the southern slope, horns sounded, Stark men calling a challenge. Torches flared along Ashemark's battlements. Jon could see shapes wheeling, scorpion arms raised. High above, Rhaegal roared, a deep bass that made the stones tremble. Shadows flickered. Jon waited, crouched behind a crumbled section of an outer curtain wall. When the watchers on the parapets rushed to aim scorpions at the dragon, Jon motioned to Serwyn. Together, they cast grappling hooks, the metal scraping quietly against stone. They tugged to secure them, then began the climb. The wall wasn't smooth, but cracks in the old stone provided just enough foothold. Jon's heart thumped wildly. One slip, one watchman's glance, and it was over. Slowly, they ascended, hugging the shadows. Above, torches flitted as men scurried to track Rhaegal's silhouette. A voice shouted, "Hold your fire until it's in range." Another responded, "But I can't see it clearly." The tension was palpable. Jon hauled himself onto the battlements. Serwyn joined him, silently dispatching a distracted guard with a quick thrust. Another guard whirled, opening his mouth to shout, but Jon lunged, driving Longclaw thr. Oof, the man sighed. The guard collapsed, a strangled cry dying on his lips. The rest of the infiltration team followed, 6 men in all, quickly spreading out to secure the walkway. They crept through an archway into the castle's interior. Ashamark's courtyards were lit by sparse lanterns. They found a few scattered guards, but most were on the ramparts or near the front gate. Stealth was crucial. Jon recalled the layout from old maps. The keep's main tower likely housed important prisoners. Carefully, they maneuvered in that direction. At one turn, 2 bandits nearly spotted them, but Serwyn feigned a drunken stagger to draw them close, allowing Jon's men to strike from behind. Another corner brought them face to face with a half-armored Sellsword. He managed a shout before falling to a sword blow, and an alarm began to ring somewhere in the courtyard. "Hurry," Jon whispered, spurring them on. The keep's door was barred from inside, but they broke a side window and climbed through. Inside, narrow corridors twisted upward. They found a locked door that looked newly reinforced. Smashing it open, they rushed in to see a small cell block. In the dim torchlight, they spotted a figure bound to a chair, Lord Glover, bruised and bloodied, but alive. Glover blinked, disbelief crossing his battered face. "Jon Snow?" he rasped, voice hoarse. "You mad fool. They'll be on us soon." Jon cut his bonds. "We're getting you out. Can you walk?" Glover winced but stood, leaning on Serwyn's shoulder. "Aye. Let's go, quickly." Behind them, shouts and clashing steel erupted. Tybolt's men had discovered the intruders. Jon led them back the way they came, forging a path through the keep's corridors. They encountered pockets of resistance, desperate bandits swinging swords in cramped hallways, but the infiltration team fought with lethal efficiency, rallying around Glover's safety. One bandit lunged for Glover's exposed flank, only to be tackled by Serwyn. Another drew a crossbow in the gloom, but Jon hurled a dagger before the bolt could fly. The crossbow clattered, the man collapsing. Alarms echoed across the castle. Time was short. They reached the courtyard, where more of Tybolt's men stood armed. Flames danced from overturned braziers, illuminating swirling shadows. Shouts of "this way" and "stop them" reverberated. Above, horns from the Stark host outside responded, and another roar from Rhaegal rumbled overhead, though it sounded more distant. Possibly Robb was avoiding direct assault to protect Glover. At least the bandits were still focusing on the gatehouse and the dragon threat. Jon's group used that distraction to slip toward the postern gate. Fighting flared at each corner. Glover, though battered, managed to wield a borrowed sword, aiding his rescuers. Suddenly, a commanding voice rose from behind a cluster of men. "Stop them! Kill the Glover Lord!" Ser Tybolt Hawthorne emerged, clad in old gilded armor bearing the lion sigil. He pointed a long sword at Jon. "Traitorous whelp! You think you can spirit him away? The West belongs to the lion, not the wolf." Jon recognized the madness glinting in the man's eyes. "This ends now. Throw down your sword." Tybolt sneered. "Never. For House Lannister." He lunged forward, swinging fiercely. Jon met his blade with Longclaw. Sparks flew in the flickering firelight. The man was skilled, fueled by fanatic rage. Their swords clashed in a deadly dance across the courtyard, each blow testing Jon's reflexes. Serwyn and the others were busy holding off bandits from the flanks, leaving Jon to face Tybolt alone. Strike, parry, pivot. Tybolt hammered a blow that jarred Jon's arm. Jon circled, weaving, trying to find an opening. Tybolt pressed on, teeth bared in a grimace. "You Targaryens bring only ruin. I'll carve out your heart and feed it to the crows." Jon gritted his teeth, blocking a slash aimed at his neck. The clang reverberated through his arms. He feinted left, then drove forward. Tybolt twisted, the tip of Longclaw scraping across his shoulder pauldron. With a snarl, Tybolt lashed out in return. The tip of his blade sliced Jon's forearm, drawing blood. Pain flared, but Jon stayed focused. He lunged again, feinting high this time, then changing angles mid-swing. Tybolt tried to parry, but Longclaw's Valyrian steel bit through his lesser blade, snapping it near the hilt. The man stumbled, shock crossing his face. Jon seized that moment, slashing across Tybolt's chest. Blood sprayed. Tybolt collapsed to his knees, gasping. His broken sword clattered on the stone. Jon raised Longclaw, breath ragged. Tybolt glared up in hate, spitting blood. "You're no king, you're nothing. The lion will rise again." His words died in a choked gasp as he sagged to the ground. At that, the remaining bandits near them faltered. Some fled, others dropped weapons. Serwyn's men quickly disarmed them. Glover, leaning on a soldier, stepped forward, wincing at his bruises. He cast a weary look at Tybolt's corpse. He was always a fanatic. Lannisters were a sinking ship, but he refused to see it. Jon lowered Longclaw, panting. The cut on his forearm ached, warm blood trickling. It's done. He turned to Glover. Let's get you out of here. They made their way through the postern gate. Outside, Robb's cavalry secured the perimeter. Shouts of victory and commands to stand down rose in the night air. Rhaegal circled overhead once more, ensuring no surprise cavalry could sally out. The bandit rebellion had lost its leader, and the backbone of their resistance was broken. In a swirl of dust and flickering torchlight, Robb rode up, dismounting swiftly. Relief washed over his features when he saw Glover alive. He clasped Glover's arm. You're safe. We'll see to your wounds. Glover managed a tight smile. Grateful to you, your grace. And to Jon. He saved my life. Robb glanced at Jon's bleeding arm, concern furrowing his brow. And you look like you need the maester as well. Jon waved it off. A scratch. Nothing more. Truthfully, it stung like fire, but he was relieved to be alive. With Tybolt's death, the rest of the bandits either surrendered or tried to flee. The subsequent day saw the Stark men clearing Ash Mark, cataloging weapons, and rescuing peasants held captive. They found scorpions indeed, though in poor repair, still dangerous enough if used properly. They destroyed or confiscated them. By midday, the fortress was secure. Robb installed a loyal Westerlord retainer to hold Ash Mark in the name of the new confederation. Any remaining rebels would be hunted down or offered a chance to surrender. Glover was grateful, praising Jon's bravery and offering to support further expansions of the realm's peace. Robb, too, seemed both relieved and proud. We've averted a civil war in the Westerlands, he remarked, gazing at the battered castle ramparts. Though I suspect it won't be the last challenge. The scars of House Lannister run deep here. Jon sighed, mindful of how many times they'd faced the brink of chaos. All we can do is keep mending the realm, piece by piece. Robb clapped him on the uninjured shoulder. And we will. Together. They spent another week stabilizing the area, ensuring Glover's party could continue with their mission of forging trade ties. Robb used Rhaegal's presence sparingly, mostly as a deterrent. Local lords who once might have hesitated to cooperate now saw the folly in resisting. Bit by bit, the promise of unity spread. Eventually, the host departed the Westerlands, heading north with Glover safely in tow. Jon rode near Robb at the column's head, occasionally looking skyward to see Rhaegal soaring, the sunlight glinting on green scales. The dragon's shape had become a symbol not of conquest, but of watchful protection. People still feared him, but they no longer assumed immediate destruction. That alone was a remarkable shift in Westeros. As they crossed the Riverlands, Robb turned to Jon one morning. You've done so much, traveling to Storm's End, saving Glover here, fighting Ser Tybolt. I owe you a debt. You may claim any boon you wish in the north. Jon gave a quiet laugh. I need no boon, Robb. I'm content knowing we're building something better. That's enough. Robb smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with warmth. Still, I'll remember your refusal. Someday you might change your mind. The wind rolled across the plains, carrying the scent of distant pine. In that moment, Jon felt a sense of belonging he'd rarely known. The realm was still fragile, the future uncertain. Yet here, riding beside Robb Stark, united by bonds of blood and shared purpose, he found hope. They had survived the dead, the dragon's wrath, and the worst of men's treacheries. Together, they shaped a broken land into something whole again. By the time the towers of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, Jon's arm had mostly healed, leaving a small scar as a reminder of his duel with Tybolt. Robb called a halt, letting the men savor the sight of home. Snow began to drift from gray clouds, soft flakes dancing in the wind. It was as if the north itself welcomed them back, gentle and unthreatening. Rhaegal circled overhead, his roar muted by the falling snow. They entered Winterfell's gates to cheers. Once more, the fortress felt like the heart of a realm that had endured unimaginable trials. Robb and Jon dismounted, greeting those who rushed to see them. Lords, ladies, servants, wildlings who had made lives here, southern travelers seeking refuge. A tapestry of faces that represented the new Westeros. In the courtyard, Rhaegal settled to rest, shaking off the light dusting of snow on his wings. Jon patted the dragon's flank, speaking soft words of thanks. Robb placed his hand on Jon's shoulder. Welcome home, brother. Jon met Robb's gaze. The memory of all their toils, flights over the battlefield, negotiations in Harrenhal, the blood oath in the Vale, the rescue at Ashmark flickered between them. "It's good to be back," Jon replied. "No matter what challenges come next, we'll face them." Robb's eyes shone with that quiet determination that so resembled Ned Stark's. "Aye, we will. We've got a realm to hold together, after all. And with the North and Targaryen blood united in one purpose, I truly believe we can do it." They turned toward the keep, the snow swirling about them in gentle swaths. Beyond these walls lay countless tasks, fortifying alliances, settling old feuds, guiding a realm that had known centuries of conflict. But within Winterfell's yard, beneath the watchful gaze of a dragon that once belonged to Daenerys Targaryen, Robb Stark and Jon Snow stood side by side, wolf and dragon, bound not by conquest but by brotherhood and hope. In their bond lay the promise that Westeros could indeed be rebuilt, forging a future where war was not the first resort, where unity need not be imposed by fire and blood, but by trust and honor hard-won. And so the wheel turned, but this time perhaps it turned toward peace.